brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the City of Eau Claire. This program is simulcast on WRFB-LP 101.
The Eau Claire City Council meeting will now come to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson.
Here.
Beaton.
Here.
Berge.
Here.
Christofferson.
Here.
Emmanuel. Gregert.
Here.
Klinkhammer. Lohr.
Here.
Weld.
Here.
Worthman.
Here.
Emmanuel.
Here.
Klinkhammer.
He shows us being there, but oh, there he is.
Here.
All right. Again, welcome to my fellow council members here in chamber, and those of you joining us remotely, and to the staff members that are here this evening as well, and to all of you that are tuning in your homes and listening either on live stream or via WebEx. This is our August 4th virtual meeting of the Eau Claire City Council.
Council President?
Yes.
Sorry, this is Council Zhang, Councilmember Zhang. I just want to make sure I'm recorded here too.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yep. Well, I'm sorry if we missed that. Yep. Yes, we have you. Thank you. Again, I want to extend a sincere welcome to all of you joining us. And again, those of you that would like to address the council, just a reminder that you will need to join this meeting as an attendee on a computer, tablet, or smartphone using the link provided on the city website. The Eau Claire City Council conducts public hearings, listening sessions, and public discussion where residents in our community are invited and encouraged to ask questions and weigh in on the important decisions we'll be making tomorrow afternoon in our legislative session or in the coming weeks and months ahead. We want to thank Valley Media Works for live streaming this proceeding. To watch, please visit valleymediaworks.org or visit channel 994 on Spectrum Cable. It is also simulcast at 101.9 FM. And you can find past meetings on the YouTube under the Chippewa Valley Media Works channel. If you plan to address the council this evening, I will briefly review the protocol. Once an agenda item is introduced, staff will present on that item, and following that presentation, the council may have questions to clarify the issue. We then will open the item for public input. Once the item is open for comment, please raise your hand on the WebEx screen, and I will call on you in the order in which the requests to speak are received. When it is your turn to comment, I will unmute you and ask you to please state your name and address and then begin sharing your comments. Welcome you to begin sharing your comments. We welcome each of you to speak up to 5 minutes, and then I'll ask you to bring your comments to a close. I'll then ask you to lower your hand, and you will then be muted, but are welcome to stay online and listen to the rest of the meeting or share a comment on any of the other agenda items or during our public commentary period. There are times when council members will ask you a follow-up question, so please give us a moment before disconnecting. Again, if you wish to speak on an item that is not listed on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. Lastly, if you're not comfortable speaking in public, you can fill out a comment form on the city website, and those comments will be shared with council members ahead of our legislative meeting tomorrow. As always, you can email or call council members, and our contact information is on the city website. With that introduction, we will get on to our first item on the agenda. A public hearing on an ordinance rezoning property located at the southwest corner of Old Town Hall Road and Graff Road from TR1A to R2P and to R3P, and to adopt the general development plan for duplexes, twin homes, and multifamily. Good evening, Mr. Allen.
Good evening, Council President Weld and members of the council. Again, before you this evening is a request as noted to rezone property from its current TR1A designation to both R2P and R3P, with the P being the designation of the general development plan, to include a mix of duplexes, twin homes, and apartments for a project known as Timber Bluff Acres, located at the southwest corner of Old Town Hall Road and Graff Road, which is item number 5 on this map, which is shown from the Plan Commission meeting last Monday, where this item was first heard. You can see there at near the interchange of Interstate 94 and Highway 53, across to the west from the Town of Washington Town Hall and Cemetery, and again south of Old Town Hall Road proper. With that, we'll skip to the next image. Thank you. This shows aerial view of the property in question, showing the 2 different zoning designations highlighted in yellow, including 3 different parcels being considered here tonight and for your action tomorrow. Skip to the next image, please. This just shows the notification area, for those who are directly notified. Again, those really simply go to city parcels, so you can see a lot of white space to the south, west, and east, because those are in the Town of Washington still. Skip to the next image. Before I get into this, actually let's jump ahead one more image, please. Thank you. This is the project and its general development plan stage, shown just for reference here for the moment. And we'll go back to that slide here momentarily. The area in question is 38.4 acres in size. I'll talk a little bit more about comprehensive plan designation here in a moment. The current land use, it is vacant and utilized primarily for agricultural purposes. Proposed land use would be what we consider medium density housing on the comprehensive plan. And with that, we'll bounce back one more image, thank you. And in terms of the comprehensive plan, as noted in the staff report to the Plan Commission, this was discussed at the Plan Commission last week, but thought it would best be shown a little bit more visually here, more directly. The area in question, again, is predominantly blue, as you see at Old Town Hall Road and Graff Road, identified as public facility and blended in with medium and high density housing to the west, thank you, to the west along the south side of Old Town Hall Road, with commercial being designated along the north side. You can zoom back out, please. Thank you. So the inset there is really the reference point for that blue designation, which is public facility. At the time of the comprehensive plan, just 5 years ago, there's an expectation perhaps for a new school property being utilized in that area. That's identified as number 86. Perhaps a bad pun, but it has been 86th, and therefore is now no longer under consideration. The Parks and Open Space Master Plan that was approved last year actually removed that and is no longer under consideration. So although the comprehensive plan at the time in 2015 was expecting a public facility, as it were, or park related to a potential school, that has been removed. So as a part of the 5-year comprehensive plan review that is currently underway at staff level, this will be updated and modified. So just want to clarify that if there's any confusion, and hopefully did not add to the confusion in terms of why there's that blue area for public facility. It's matching up again with a anticipated school, which is no longer anticipated. So with that, Old Town Hall Road on the south side there is predominantly anticipated for that medium to high density housing or residential use, which is what's before you today. So with that, we'll jump ahead to the next slide again, showing this overall, again, general development plan. The project itself is being considered as under the name of Timber Bluff Acres, and it would be comprised of 9 different, what the applicant has called communities, or pods. So if you hear those terms, they're interchangeable for different phases or parts of phases and areas with like building types within each of those different communities. As proposed, the project here you see before you would have 328 units in what there would be currently proposed as 2 different phases. The configuration would be 34 twin home units, 24 fourplex units, 88 eightplex, 60 tenplex, 48 12plex. And at the northeast part of the project, so the top right part of your screen there, would be a 60-plus campus or senior housing of 4 two-story buildings for 74 units total. So if my math is correct, that's where we get the 328 housing units proposed. The development would also provide dedicated open space of just under 5 acres at kind of the south central part of the project. You can see proposed stormwater detention areas, and this would have sports courts, tot lots, trails, benches, and those stormwater features. This area is proposed to be part of that R2P designation. So kind of wrapping around along the south side would be R2, and then on the west side would also be the R2. The remainder would be the R3 designation. So again, although not required by city codes, the applicant has noted that the project would provide, in fact, all of its units as workforce housing. That was a comment that was brought up at the Plan Commission meeting last week to request the applicant further define that. In conversations with the applicant, they can confirm that here, hopefully tonight, that they are in that same range as what one would consider workforce housing per their county median income designation. Access to the development would be 2 streets off of Old Town Hall Road, as you see that in the north, and 1 street off of Graff Road with no cul-de-sacs proposed. Deputy City Engineer Leah Nessel will talk a little bit more about traffic and access and streets here momentarily. What would be forthcoming yet, both before, which would go before the Plan Commission and or City Council, would be a preliminary plat, final plat, developer's agreement, and then final site plans for each of those communities or phases, and those will be reviewed at a later date. In the staff report, there were included 7 conditions from engineering department for, again, consideration moving forward with those approvals. Should note as well that portions of the land within this development do have slopes that are steeper than 20%. We can go to the next slide, please. You can see that predominantly to the west side, where you see the number 2 circled. That is kind of a node of the 20% slopes. There's some steeper slopes. And again, thank you. You can see there, this is the topographic map, so showing the contours. The applicant is, again, with the general development plan, a general layout of the proposed buildings and streets. So again, trying to keep buildings and parking lots out of that general area, but should note that that north-south road on the west side there does cut through that. That was also a point of discussion at the Planning Commission last week. And again, further discussion with the applicant indicates that they are agreeable to looking at some possible modifications, alternatives to the layout cutting straight up through that that area. So again, I don't want to put words into the applicant's mouth, so I'll let them discuss that as well. We can go to the next slide. This shows, again, this is just a rough boundary map that was provided by the applicant since the Plan Commission meeting The intent was to show a little bit more of the overall long-term proposed approach, but again, in terms of the development and again, several future phases. Again, because those parcels to the south are not in the city limits of the city of Eau Claire, obviously not before you as part of the consideration here tonight, but the applicant was willing to show kind of their long-term boundaries that they would be considering moving forward. Part of the intent being that in terms of the scale, the area that would be impacted for those 20% slopes is kind of that small portion at the northwest corner of, or quadrant of the current proposal, but again is in a broader sense a little bit smaller scale in reference to the rest of the area that they're again under consideration. So certainly not to take this as you know, a final build-out proposal, but kind of their thoughts moving forward as to how this proposal before you tonight fits into their larger plans. With that, we can jump to the next slide. In terms of the traffic, and 2 more slides here before I turn it over to Deputy City Engineer Leah Ness for her comments on, in particular, traffic impact analysis, which came out, at least the initial report came out just in advance of the Plan Commission meeting. So hopefully I have a little more information to share here with council tonight. But this map, again, rough highlighting on my part, showing the portions of Old Town Hall Road and Graff Road that are currently in the city limits of Eau Claire. So in terms of just general reference and what is connected to this parcel or these parcels and this project and what's already in the city of Eau Claire. So again, just for some context, that this quadrant again is fully within the city limits of the city of Eau Claire, and but it does end a bit to the west along Old Town Hall Road, and obviously immediately south of here on Graff Road. Those portions still remain in the town of Washington. Again, kind of looking at this a little more holistically in the larger scheme of things, this was before you several months ago for annexation, and you move through those processes as well. But now again, going through this initial process with general development plan and rezoning. If we can go to the next slide, please. This shows a little bit more specifically related to the bike and ped plan in this area. The gray, kind of gray box, again, apologize for my crude highlighting. Kind of in the center, lower center of the screen is the rough area of the project in question. Again, the red shows some neighborhood routes along Old Town Hall Road for bicycle and pedestrian use, so long-term trail use. And then the dashed green shows proposed trails. There's some discussion about kind of, again, for lack of a better term, what I call a flyover or a bridge over Interstate 94, connecting those properties south of the interstate to those north up towards the mall. And then the dashed green line to the right, to the east there, showing along the creek, Otter Creek there, I believe, I'm guessing right, connecting parts of the south Highway 53 near this property, and then up across 53 and 94, and then over along the creek up that way. So 2 different possible routes longer term. Again, some discussion about, you know, timing and you know, extent of that as related to these types of developments. But again, this is kind of the next one down the line, as you see to the bottom right of the screen. That was the last larger residential development that came in along Highway 53, and now this is kind of the next step, actually a little bit more close to town and accessing utilities as well. So with that, again, I'll turn it over to Leah Ness here in a moment, but she can talk more about the traffic impact analysis. Should note too, again, as noted in the staff report, all utilities are accessible to the project, and again, had been fully within the urban sewer service area. So again, that was important to note moving into the annexation and now into this next first development phase. Last thing I do want to mention, I did not mention at the Planning Commission, but in the comprehensive plan, in Chapter 6, which is natural resources, there are some recommendations and comments in there about steep slopes. So just for reference sake, that is something that is not just kind of a wish list type item. It is something that we've identified, and actually through the Regional Planning Commission have identified as well as an important criteria for reviewing as well. So with that, the next slide, and I can turn it over to Leah if she's available.
Yep. Ms. Ness.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about the traffic impact analysis that was requested with this proposed development. The information or trips generated by the proposed development brought forward the need for an abbreviated TIA. That was completed and provided to staff last week on Monday, just prior to the Plan Commission meeting. The analysis looked at 4 intersections or potential access points, 3 of which are potential access points to the development, and then the intersection of Old Town Hall Road and Rapp Road. The trip generations ranged from 130 to 150 during the peak hour, and looking at the level of service at each of the intersections analyzed or access points, they all movements operated at a level of service B or better. And on the screen you can see kind of the grading system that we use for level of service in driving, where a level of service A is less than 10 seconds delay at a unsignalized intersection, and a level of service B is 10 to 15 seconds of delay at the intersection. So looking at the analysis that was provided, we don't anticipate a large delay of traffic, and the queuing of traffic at the intersections look to be 1 to 2 vehicles at the most based on the analysis. I have provided the draft TIA to the town of Washington and Eau Claire County for their review as well. We had decided that the trip distribution for the analysis would be based off of the existing traffic generation and distribution that's currently occurring out there. The traffic counts for the study were taken in July of this year, which was during a lower travel period. So the trips were actually inflated by 25% to represent a more realistic traffic volume analysis of which we would typically see in 2020. Just kind of to touch on the streets that we're looking at, or the roads, Old Town Hall Road and Grass Road, which are both rural cross sections right now, with ditches, no curb and gutter, shoulders. They're 45-mile-per-hour roadways. So looking at the distance between the driveways, it does meet the recommendations that we outline in our comprehensive plan for spacing. And I think those were the items that I wanted to touch on tonight. So if you guys have any questions related to the traffic or utilities, I'd be available to answer those.
Any questions from council for Ms. Ness? Councilmember Greger.
Thank you, President Weldon. Thank you, Ms. Ness and Mr. Allen. Obviously, I saw this at Plan Commission too, and I appreciate the additional information that we've been able to provide since then, including both the bike and pedestrian plan and the comprehensive plan. And this TIA obviously was just brand new at Plan Commission too. I guess I wanted to dive in a little bit more on the access to the rest of the city from this location from a bike and pedestrian standpoint, but also from a transit standpoint, and bringing local traffic in terms of automobile traffic in and out of the rest of the city, because not everybody likes to go through a roundabout and then a cloverleaf intersection kind of situation and freeways when they're driving. So, and obviously people walking and biking cannot go through that cloverleaf intersection because it's a freeway. So I wanted to ask, if we had some information about the cost long-term for the city to develop, a road bridge or a bike and pedestrian bridge, or a combination of both, I guess, across I-94 and connecting with either Ayers Court or potentially east of the Holiday Inn, and just get a sense, because, the more we develop out in this area, the more it's going to cost the city to provide, transportation connections out there.
Yeah, I can talk to that. Looking at our 5-year CIP, we did not have anything included for an overpass going over I-94 west of 53 interchange, but it is in the comprehensive plan, as you had mentioned. Working with our other deputy city engineer, we're estimating the cost of building a structure for vehicular traffic for motor vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists would range from $2 to $5 million potentially, really depending on the amount of land that you have to span, and we'd have to look at acquiring land potentially and the best location for that crossing. So that analysis has not been done yet. But to talk to the existing infrastructure that we have today to get there, there is the bike trail along 93 that will take you down to Old Town Hall Road, and you'd have to go up past Fleet Farm and kind of bike down the road from the west. So we do have our trail system that we can connect into to the west, as well as the potential trail system along Otter Creek that Mr. Allen had mentioned earlier that's identified in the bike plan. And we've been working with Eau Claire County on moving forward with that potentially here. For pedestrians within the development, they are showing connectivity with the multi-use trail and sidewalks along their streets, which would be urban cross sections with curb and gutter. And then we had mentioned, or it was mentioned at Plan Commission, about connecting the sidewalks to Graff Road to the east. Additionally, as we look to do improvements on Old Town Hall Road and Graff Road in the city sections, we'd also look at sidewalk and a multi-use path or a bike lane to help bring that connectivity to the bicycle and pedestrian community through that area.
Thank you. Do you mind if I have a follow-up?
Certainly.
Is there a cost estimate on if we were to do just a bike and pedestrian bridge, up to the mall area from here, or is it really something that the comprehensive plan or that staff would feel like would be necessary to do a road bridge with bike and pedestrian in combination? Or is it something that is somewhat optional, I guess, is to have maybe just a bike and pedestrian connection instead, so that partly to reduce cost? But do you also feel like a road bridge is necessary?
I think we'd really have to look at the demand and the potential future demand for that connection. You do bring up a good point, and I did look into the cost of just doing a pedestrian structure, which will probably range 1.5 to 2 million to span over I-94. And again, depending on the location of it, the span of the structure, and needed parcels that we'd have to acquire to make that fit. But there should be some studies done to determine what's feasible and what type of connectivity will be most beneficial.
This is one other follow-up, if that's okay.
Sure.
For this type of, transportation connection that goes over like a freeway like this, is there ever federal or state money that is an option for something that is, essentially the barrier is created by the federal or state government, and it's essentially is it something that the local government has to shoulder the cost of trying to bridge across solely, or is it something that is shared?
I'd have to look into that further, but I do know if there are safety concerns, if there's pedestrian crashes related, that typically brings up the funding and makes the funding more available. But that's something that I would have to get more clarification on and look forward at.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from council for Ms. Ness or for Mr. Allen? I do not see any questions. I can ask the applicant. The applicant has any information that they wish to share? Mr. Bohan, good evening.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Sorry about that. I have my mute on. My name is Sean Bohan. I live at 1504 Sherwin Avenue, Eau Claire. I'm the engineer on the project, engineer with Advanced Engineering Concepts. Mr. Allen and Ms. Ness did a great job of explaining this proposed development. Proximity, also the traffic, utilities, and everything. There's a couple things that we wanted to just bring up in addition to what's already been discussed. As I mentioned, Leah did a great job on discussing the traffic about the different intersections, the level of service. The utilities out there, sanitary sewer, water main, have been extended down Old Town Hall Road, and then they are stubbed out into Graff Road. It's part of a project that was done a number of years ago. It does go to a lift station for the sanitary sewer, so the facilities are there, which is great. We don't end up we just have to bring them into our site. Density on the project, as Mr. Allen had explained, we do end up having this broken up into different communities. Different types of buildings, some of them with attached garages, some with detached garages, and some with just surface parking on the multifamily. The R2 is both twin homes and duplexes that would end up having attached garages, the 60-plus community, and then also the fourplexes. The density is about a little over 8.5 units per acre. So as was previously discussed, it's 38.4 acres, 328 units total. Mr. Allen did end up sharing that slide with the council and stuff as far as how we see this developing in the future. And that was showing additional properties to both the south and to the southwest. We'd end up seeing those properties as basically a low density, maybe an R2 and an R1. So maybe more twin homes and more single family. And it was brought up, and the reason we brought this up was questions that ended up happening in the Planning Commission meetings. And it was mainly dealing with some of the 20% slope and that little finger that kind of juts out from the west. And it is the only area that ends up being wooded, but what we wanted to end up showing is that we're looking at, future development in this area and, what the properties to both the south and southwest end up having. Not only there's some steeper slopes in there, but it's totally forested. There'll be a good portion of it that you just won't be able to develop just for the mere fact of the steeper slopes. So what we were trying to depict in showing this is that, hey, there's going to be a lot of area, there's going to be a lot of green space, a lot of trees, and steeper slopes that are going to remain untouched. And so when we were showing the road going through the finger that juts out into the north, we were just trying to depict that the scale of that is really small compared to what we end up having in the south and southwest. Trying to end up going around that would probably end up costing us, or costing the site probably anywhere from 12 to like 18 units. Just trying to end up going around that, and we have a density that we feel is pretty low to begin with the little over 8.5. So we are looking at going through that area with the road, and we'll see what we can do as far as saving trees on the west and stuff. Certainly we'll have trees planted throughout. We end up having a park that's planned. We have trail systems that's throughout, sidewalks. The connectivity is really well, works really well, and then we can end up having the trail end up actually going out to Graff Road per recommendations. I think that would be about it, unless you guys end up having some questions for me.
Are there any questions for the applicant from council? Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld, and thank you, Mr. Bohan. Yeah, and I appreciate the extra context on the development that is potentially going to happen further to the southwest, and the green and the forested land. So I guess my question would be about there's that area of 20% slopes in the northwest. You feel that is not super significant compared to the broader scope of the project. Would you say that the quality of like the trees or the wildlife in that area, I guess where that's labeled as number 2 on the map right now with the 20% slopes is like not as high, it's not as high quality, I guess you could say, as the other part, or I guess it's kind of an odd way of putting it, but just trying to get a sense of, essentially the road is going to go right through it and then it's all going to be wiped out as far as I can tell, or will there be some trees left in that area?
So if there are some trees left, it'll be probably right along the western boundary. Mm-hmm. And if you end up, if we go back to the slide that kind of shows the overall for the entire development, basically the western line and stuff ends up being the tree line, for the properties. I can't really speak to the wildlife. I'm assuming that, that they would end up using it. But as far as the trees, I've been out there 2 different times. It seemed like it was, lower quality, kind of some scrubby stuff that ended up being out there. Certainly not as dense and as the forested areas and stuff that end up being in the south and southwest. But, in cutting that road through, you'd probably lose everything slope-wise on the east side of that road. But on the west side, there would be some probably left fairly close to the property line or so.
Okay. So I have a follow-up question to that about the trees that we're seeing on the southeast. I guess on that previous slide, you can see them better, but there's some of them as part of this particular, project. That how much of those would be removed for that stormwater pond, and that kind of border set of trees? Do you see all of that being wiped out, or is there a way to save some of that?
If we can save them, we'll definitely try to do that. I know that little little area of trees that just ends up being to the east of the pond. I think that's where you're maybe referring to, and that does fall in into our stormwater facilities, and the road does kind of cut through there, but certainly the stuff further to the west on that, there might be some areas that we can certainly try to end up saving. And then along the border, which would end up being, I guess, the southern border and stuff where there are some trees and stuff, there might be the possibility. We do have a stormwater pond that we're just showing preliminary wise and stuff that falls along that. And maybe we're able to end up saving some of that and shifting the pond a little bit to the north. So we're providing the general development plan, and there's certainly modifications and stuff that will be made to the plans as we bring them forward with our final site plans, our preliminary plat. But we want to end up showing, the stormwater. We've gone through and done some preliminary sizing for that. The location where it's shown is the natural drainage way that comes through there. So we don't want to end up, trying to fight the contours at all and force a stormwater facility where it doesn't naturally flow to begin with. But we will definitely try to end up going ahead and saving what we can for any of the trees especially along the borders.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bohan.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from council for the applicant? I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Bohan.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing, and if there's anyone here that wishes to speak to this agenda item, Ms. Wolfbrand.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Good evening.
Good evening, Council President Weld and members of the City Council. My name is Susan Wolfgram. I live at 550 Graham Avenue in downtown Eau Claire. I sit on the Plan Commission, and I'm co-chair of the Jonah Affordable Housing Task Force. I support the rezoning and adoption of the General Development Plan. Wurzer Builders recognizes the need for workforce housing in our city. We know from our Chippewa Valley Affordable Housing Task Force that housing is needed in our city at all price points, but that our neighbors living with housing insecurity need to be a priority. I want to provide some context first before my comments on Timber Bluff Acres. Our neighbors living with housing insecurity live below the 60% of county median income, where workforce housing begins. It continues to be concerning that these workers are not included in the workforce definition. They comprise at minimum 38% of those working in our city. I need to acknowledge, as I have many times with previous developments, that this development is in a retail hub of Eau Claire, where according to the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development and 2018 U.S. Department of Labor Bureau of Labor Statistics, we know that 38% of our workforce are in the 25 lowest paid high employment occupations, many in this area, the median income being $28,000, which is less than 50% of the county median income, or CMI, of $60,000 a year, approximately. Workforce housing starts at 60% of the CMI, or approximately $36,000 a year. We will not know until 2022, most likely, how these members of our workforce have been impacted by COVID. However, we also know that it's not reasonable to expect developers to be able to meet this very real need in our community without our city being able to incentivize the gap financing challenges. We cannot rely on WHEDA tax credits to provide housing for our community members in this 30 to 50% income range. Myself and the Jonah Affordable Housing Task Force want to encourage the City Council and city staff to activate the Housing Opportunities Commission to begin its work at finding nimble and creative solutions so that developers who are committed to building housing for our vulnerable neighbors are able to move forward. It's a significant contribution that Wurzer Builders has designated all 328 units as workforce housing, and within a mixed housing, multiple small communities type design. We understand that some of our neighbors are concerned about their loss of country living, quote unquote. To meet our housing needs, many housing advocates, including ourselves, suggest that we need to use a variety of solutions. One is to scatter new affordable units around the community. Eau Claire has done a good job of encouraging builders to use vacant lots rather than focus on one big development. We simply don't have enough vacant lots left to meet the need. Another is to make those larger new developments include a variety of housing at a variety of price points, designed with connectivity and green space, and appealing to a diverse population. A good example of this is the SC Swiderski development that's been approved on the Upper West Side across the highway from Menards Distribution Center. Over the next few years, they will be building over 500 new units, which are a mix of retirement apartments, twin homes, single-family and multi-unit apartment buildings. Now Werther is building in that same diverse model. I had one ask at Plan Commission of the developer to include in the narrative. That was to provide a specific definition of workforce housing before this came before you today. SC Swiderski, again, a comparable workforce housing development, included the Chippewa Valley Affordable Housing Task Force definition in their narrative. The Urban Land Institute, in the definition that the Chippewa Valley Affordable Housing Task Force uses, defines workforce housing as housing that is affordable to households earning 60 to 120% of the county median income and intended for moderate to middle income households, not spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. Again, in Eau Claire County, the county median income hovers close to $60,000. Therefore, workforce housing incomes would range from approximately $36,000 to $72,000 a year. The rents that Werther includes in the narrative are in the range $895 to $1,475 a month, which fall within the 60 to 100% of county median income, but rents are not a definition. Why is the definition of workforce housing important? The primary reason from our perspective is to strengthen relationships with our community. When proposals like this come before Plan Commission and City Council, a frequent comment we hear from members of the public is, and I'm paraphrasing, I bet those units aren't really affordable. Or, sure, they may be affordable now, but how long will that last? Historically, there is good reason for members of the public to be skeptical. If a developer does not define what they mean by affordable or workforce housing, or doesn't make a commitment to keep the units that way for the foreseeable future, the public loses trust in that developer and those that follow. This can also extend to our commissions and council who move the developments forward. I ask that the definition of workforce housing that our Chippewa Valley Affordable Housing Task Force uses be included in the Timber Bluffs Acres narrative before your vote tomorrow. Thank you for your consideration of my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Wolfgram. Any questions? Any questions from council for Ms. Wolfgram? I don't see any. Have a great night. Thank you. Anyone else that wishes to speak to this agenda item? Again, I'll ask if there's anyone else that wishes to speak to this agenda item. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 2. A public discussion of an ordinance amending Chapter 6.15 entitled Keeping of Poultry of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Eau Claire. This item is being brought forward by Councilmember Christopherson and myself, and so I can just share a brief narrative along with Councilmember Christopherson as well, and if council has any questions following, we're happy to hear them. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to work with Councilmember Christopherson on this amendment. Just some background on this ordinance. In November of 2018, council approved the keeping of poultry in the city limits of Eau Claire. And as it states in the current ordinance under 6.15.030, license required, the city shall notify all property owners within 100 feet of the applicant, and any abutting property owner can object to the issuance or renewal. Upon objection, the application is then brought before council to decide who can keep poultry and who cannot. So far, we've had 2 such cases that have sought consideration from council the past few months. I support the keeping of poultry, but have struggled with the application and approval process. Under the current ordinance, one objection from an abutting owner removes the neighboring or abutting property owners from the approval process, and then requires council to decide again who can keep poultry in the neighborhood and who cannot. The proposed changes to the ordinance would require the applicants to contact all property owners within 100 feet of the applicant's property with verbal or written information about their intent to apply for or renew a poultry license, and show signatures of 2/3 of those neighbors that are in support of the application. What comes from this amendment is two things. One, it assures the neighbors and the applicant that they are the only voices in the application process. And secondly, it encourages positive interaction, learning, and understanding throughout our neighborhoods. Councilmember Christopherson, did you wish to share any
Thank you, President Weld. There are other aspects of this ordinance that, in talking with community members, we had feedback that there might be some other processes that we could consider. But at this point, this is the amendment that we have decided is the most easily introduced into the community at this time. And at all points, President Weld and I were talking about ways in which we can continue to build a more robust relationship among community members and to remove an authoritative role for the council. So as we continue to look at this ordinance and to improve some of the aspects and making it more available to our citizens and residents, we are going to be looking at ways that we can continue to connect our residents with one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Christopherson. Are there any questions from council regarding this agenda item? Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, Council President Wells, and thank you to you and Councilmember Christopherson for your work on this. Council certainly has, as I think you worded very accurately, had to play really a judicial role, and I think having criteria that makes it more objective will be really helpful for the community as we move forward. A couple of questions, and I really appreciate, again, your work on this. So I'm sure you probably have thought about 100 scenarios, and I know you're bringing forth the best possibility from your work. So what happens in a scenario where maybe the neighbors change so that somebody received indication from their neighbors and then maybe the configuration changes? So that's my first question. And then, yeah, I guess I'll just stick with that question for tonight. Thank you.
And if I heard the question correctly, is if there's a change in the neighborhood as far as ownership, is that correct?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. You know, obviously, there would still be a renewal process for the licensing, you know, whether it's on a yearly basis or every other year, or however it is that we decide to continue with this. Right now, it is a yearly basis that the application would have to be renewed, and at which time, you know, the poultry keepers would still need to go out and visit with their neighbors and have the conversation and look for the signatures. Are there any other questions from council? Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld. My question was about how the 2/3 threshold was determined and a little bit more of the rationale on that particular choice. Thank you.
I think if we look back to the beekeeping ordinance, at that time it was 80%, and I think, you know, there was some discussion with you know, that continuing forward with the when the poultry keeping ordinance was introduced. But I guess with the idea that, and again, I can allow Councilmember Christopherson too to speak to this, but The idea was that we've approved poultry keeping within the community. I think we want to see people taking advantage of this and learning from it and growing from it. And so we felt that going from what was 80% to 2/3 hopefully would provide the opportunity for more people to keep poultry. And then, you know, as the community becomes more and more familiar with it, and we start to grow with the number of people that want to be poultry keepers, then, you know, we can obviously look at that approval process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions from council? I did not see any. Again, this is a public discussion, so if there's anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item, please raise your hand. Again, I'll ask if there's anyone that wishes to speak to this agenda item. Seeing none, we will move on to our public comment period. For those of you that wish to speak this evening during the public comment period, please click on the icon to raise your hand. I will call on you in the order in which they appear on my screen. Please state your name and city of Eau Claire address. The public comment period is for those living or working in the city of Eau Claire. Please note that your thoughts or ideas should be regarding issues or concerns of citywide application, and please do not comment on issues that were on tonight's agenda, as council wants and needs to hear those comments during the noticed hearing or discussion. Also, please be aware that during this public comment period, council members are not allowed to ask questions or comment on your remarks, so please do not misinterpret our silence. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and then I'll ask you to bring your comments to a close. This comment period will last for 20 minutes unless it is the wish of 2/3 of the council to extend it. Is there anyone that wishes to speak during the public comment period? Then I'll ask if there's anyone that wishes to speak during the public comment period. Seeing none, we will close the public comment period. And at this time, it is the intention of council to go into closed session. We will be closing the public meeting link, and council will rejoin in the closed session link. Upon completion of our closed session work, we will vote to come out of closed session, and the public meeting will be adjourned from there. On a motion by Councilmember Anderson and seconded by Councilmember Klinkhammer, the City Council may go into closed session to provide direction to staff and discuss bargaining parameters for upcoming negotiations and the strategy to be employed in labor negotiations with Transit Union Local 1310, which is permitted in closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes 19.851E. Are there any questions from council about going into closed session in regards to this matter? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson. Anderson. Beaton.
Aye.
Berge.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel.
Aye.
Gregert.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Lohr.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Anderson.
I think she's trying to speak, but we couldn't hear her.
Sure. Okay. Okay. With that, we will go into closed session. Again, council members, if you could leave this meeting and then join us in the WebEx for the work session in 5 minutes. and give everyone a chance to get something to drink, and we'll see you back here at 8:05. The Eau Claire City Council meeting will now come to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson. Anderson. Beaton.
Here.
Berge. Here. Christofferson.
Here.
Emmanuel.
Here.
Gregert.
Here.
Klinkhammer.
Here.
Lohr.
Here.
Weld.
Here.
Worthman.
Here.
Zhang.
Here.
Anderson.
Well, she's unmiking, so she's here. Again, welcome to all of you joining us here in chambers, both staff and council members, and those of you joining us from remote locations. And again, also welcome to my fellow council members. This is our Tuesday, August 25th legislative session of the Eau Claire City Council. Thank you to the residents that, again, are joining us here today for the virtual meeting. During our legislative session this afternoon, the council members will be participating either remotely or in person to deliberate and take action on the agenda items before us today. City staff and council members have spent a great deal of time preparing for this meeting, and again, I have sincere appreciation for their continued work and dedication to our community. I also want to thank Valley Media Works and their staff for live streaming this meeting. To watch, please visit valleymediaworks.org or visit channel 994 on Spectrum Cable. The first item on our agenda is the COVID-19 update from City Manager Peters. Good afternoon, Mr. Peters.
Good afternoon, Council President Weld and members of the City Council, and thank you for this opportunity to provide you an update on where we're at with COVID-19 in the Eau Claire community. As we have started these updates, I will again just remind you of the best places to get information. The first of that is the website, the Coronavirus COVID-19 Information Hub, which is supported by the Eau Claire Health Department, and there's also data there from the Economic Recovery Task Force. So lots of good information there, and would encourage anybody to get up-to-date statistics and information and questions answered through that website. I would also remind you that all of the work that's being done with our response to COVID-19 is based upon defined metrics and statistics, and those metrics and the statistics and the benchmarks and how we're doing with those benchmarks are all, again, located in that website. There are live updates that are done by our local health officer, Ms. Lisa Giese, on Monday and Wednesday afternoons at 3:30. And there's still a call center that can also be called at 831-7425. And of course, there's information that we provide in a timely way on the Facebook page as well. In terms of where we're at right now, we have had 737 positive cases. This is data that was actually just pulled and compiled this morning. And so we're still looking at it and understanding it, but we have 737 cases as of today. Unfortunately, we have lost 6 of our community members in death to COVID-19, and to date we've had 36 people who have been hospitalized with COVID-19. In terms of just kind of some other things related to the data, we still remain in the high as designated by the state. That is because we had 6 cases last week. However, that is down from 78 the week before that, and that's down from the week before that. So the good news is this is our third straight week in a row that the number of cases has decreased, but it's still a high number of cases with 60 a week. But the trend is going in the right direction. We've had 8 outbreaks in the past 14 days, and the community spread this past week is at 33%, and that's the number of cases where the person who has COVID-19 doesn't know how they got that, and that's about holding steady over our last reporting period. And in the last 2 weeks, there have been 638 contacts, or about 5.4 contacts per case. This is some of the heavy lifting that's being done by our health department, and I just mentioned that number to just give you a sense of the magnitude of the work that's being done on the ground to manage COVID-19 in our community. In terms of some of the metrics, as you look at them, and again, these are all on the website, we're really measuring and tracking 3 big broad categories: disease occurrence, healthcare capacity, and the capacity of our public health department. In terms of disease occurrence, we are actually also going in a little bit in the right direction. 2 weeks ago, we had 3 red indicators. We now have 2. And we had 1 yellow and 1 yellow now, and then we went from 1 green to 2 greens, and that's primarily in that decrease in the number of cases that we're having by week. So that's a big shift that we were able to go from a red indicator to a green indicator there. And again, it's a trend in the right direction, although 60 cases a week is still considered high for our community. In terms of the healthcare capacity, that is still in the green indication. So our ability to have hospital capacity to handle is still in the green and remains in the green. And finally, our public health response capacity has gone from 2 yellows to 1 green and 1 yellow. So we have a little bit of improvement there in our ability, but no reds in terms of our healthcare capacity. And this, we track these things so that we're able to see how our community has the capacity to handle cases and where the trends are going, so that we can, and then the health orders that are put together, by our health officer are driven by these metrics. In terms of just some other updates for you, the emergency order is on your agenda again for review later. It would extend the emergency order from August 25th, from today through September 22nd. And we would ask that continue to be in place as it provides flexibility in our ability to respond. It does provide for the remote meetings, and it also supports the health order. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're also working on our process for getting ready for the November election. That may seem far away, but for perspective, we had about 4,000 folks use our drive-through facility to vote from their vehicle of choice, whether that be a car or a scooter, motorcycle, or feet. But we are expecting that to be double or triple in November. So from about 4,000 vehicles served to approximately 8,000 to 12,000 in November. So we're thinking through what that means in terms of capacity and timing. We are exploring the possibility of expanding the hours, so we can have later into the evening as well as some Saturday hours, just so that we can accommodate the increased traffic. But there will be some slightly different traffic flows, and it's probably going to impact Dewey Street and maybe some other surrounding parking lots. But we're working through that and the details of that so that we can handle that kind of capacity in November. And then we're also assisting the schools with some of the school return related issues. In terms of the Economic Recovery Task Force, they continue to work hard to support the culture of face coverings, and that slowing the spread of disease in our community is good for business, and then also work with the different sectors for the recovery. The Economic Recovery Task Force is also working to support the work of UWEC and our schools. They are working with employers to encourage workforce flexibility as daycare and child care needs are going to need to be adapted and have some flexibility going into the school year. And then also helping the businesses with child care and some different ideas and support there. So in terms of next steps, as we talk about masks, the governor's order was effective August 1st. As some of you may have heard, there was a legal challenge today to that governor's order, and we are prepared. We're preparing a local approach that can be presented in our community if that becomes needed. We're also preparing ordinances that could extend past the emergency order. So thinking in terms of whether the emergency order will be needed and for how far going forward. But principally, there are some things that are being supported by the emergency order that could be supported in other ways. So we are working on an ordinance related to remote meetings that we can bring for you for independent consideration, as well as how support for the health order could be supported outside of or beyond an emergency order. We will also continue to remain flexible to the changing conditions and the orders as they come out. We're making operational adjustments as needed. We continue to support the economic recovery efforts and support the Respond Together plan. That's all I had. I'm certainly open to any questions, and I would just point out that our health officer, Lisa Giese, is also on the line and available for any questions that you might have.
Any questions from council for Mr. Peters or Ms. Giese? Councilmember Berge.
Thank you, Council President. I was just wondering, because the Hobbs, I know, is tied to the emergency order, so I was wondering if there was an update on that and if we're still on schedule for that timeline. Do you know what I'm referencing?
Can you repeat the first part of your question?
The Hobbs Ice Arena, I was wondering an update about that.
Oh, Hobbs. Yep. So we are on track to have. I mean, we're still working through some of the details on that, but we have said that there would be ice available for the users of Hobbs on September 19th, and we are still planning, and we anticipate being on track for that.
Councilmember Gregert.
Yeah, thank you, President Weldon. Thank you, Mr. Peters. I've been getting a number of questions about kind of the intersection of these restrictions and potential impact on other aspects of health, particularly mental health and youth and sports. I'm not sure if there's a lot of data or study that's gone into this, like on the national level or the local level, but just kind of wondering how that plays into the consideration for, how we tackle the virus, but also make sure we don't have other unintended results for people's health in the community.
Ms. Giese, would you like to respond to that?
I certainly can. Thank you, Councilmember Gregert and City Council. First of all, I would assure you that all of the work we've been doing at the Health Department has really strongly considered a variety of factors that are priorities in our community. Certainly mental health and substance use, as you've heard me say in many previous occasions, are priority issues for our community, not only the Health Department, but our community healthcare partners and many others. So they are primary concerns in this department as we move forward. The order is written in a way that focuses very specifically on the specific risk factors that were related to COVID-19 and very deliberately have left open every possible option for creatively addressing things like social isolation and physical activity, two primary drivers of challenges that have been expressed by many. So just a reminder to the council that the order does not speak to people needing to stay home or people needing to be socially isolated. It doesn't speak to people not being able to be physically active or engage in activities that are really appropriate for all of us to do. Really, the order only speaks to things like keeping 6 feet distance in public spaces, like staying home when you are ill, and other really very common sense connected to COVID-19 practices. So it's a reminder to everyone is that that's the frame. I know the language often used is concerning, and we all importantly have to pay attention to that. But my encouragement to the community, as I regularly talk, is about how to find creative ways to do the things that we all know build a stronger community and individuals.
And if I could add or build on that, I would just say that we're a community that has a lot of outdoor opportunities with our 30 plus miles of recreation trails, and we've worked hard to keep the parks and the open spaces open and as safe as we can, and encouraging people to use those spaces, although honoring the health order with this, the 6 feet apart. And, to the extent that structured sports are having to, respond to how and if they can be done, safely, there are other alternatives of ways of exercising and practicing, good mental health. And, last year we did start working with Winter Mission, and so we are still committed to, and probably this year more than ever, the need will be there to have as many opportunities as we can for mental health outside of homes that can be done safely. So continue our work with Winter Mission and keeping those recreation and outdoor opportunities available, and continue, of course, doing that as we have this summer.
Council Vice President Emanuel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Council President and Mr. Peters and Ms. Giese. My question is for Mr. Peters, and it has to do with city operations. I'm wondering if you can share an update on kind of the overall approach that the city is taking for employees regarding working from home. And I know not all positions are conducive to that, so I certainly understand that. But really, could you give us an update around kind of what that looks like right now due to COVID?
Absolutely. Excellent question, and it's actually one that ties into the work of the Economic Economic Recovery Task Force, because we're encouraging all employers to be as flexible as they possibly can. So we have a considerable number of employees that are still working remotely. They're able to get their work done. We encourage that. We support that. We have minimal staff where it's needed in the office setting. So we're encouraging people to be able to have that separation and be able to work remotely when and where they can. For the jobs that can't work remotely, we have altered work practices and work groups so that we're working in smaller groups and that we're not overlapping or intersecting those groups, so that they work more in pods or smaller groups, so that should there be an infection within that group, it doesn't spread to other throughout the workforce. We also are taking key positions and are intentionally making sure that key positions that are needed to, in either leadership or in technical skill, that those are separated out and not overlapping or interacting, so that we have redundancy in those skills. In terms of schools and the child care needs, we're working on a case-by-case basis, and the direction to all of our supervisors is to be willing to explore all possibilities to provide flexibility. So, for example, if somebody works in our parks division and they could work in an evening, or they could work on the weekend and still get their work done. And it provides the flexibility that they need for their child care situation. We are open and flexible with that. So we're working with everybody on a case-by-case basis to first get our work done, but also recognize that these are very, very unique and challenging times for our employees that have families, particularly families with young children, and working to find that flexibility so that they're able to still work for us and also accommodate the changing needs of their families.
Any other questions for Mr. Peters or Ms. Giese from council in regards to COVID-19? I do not see any other questions. Thank you both for all your help and all your work, and to your staff as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next item of business is the consent agenda. Do council members have any questions regarding the consent agenda or wish to remove an item for separate consideration? Seeing none, then on a motion by Councilmember Anderson and seconded by Councilmember Klinkhammer, the consent agenda has been moved and discussion is in order. Is there any discussion in regards to the consent agenda? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Anderson. Beaton.
Aye.
Berge.
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
Emmanuel.
Aye.
Gragert.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Lohr.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Anderson.
And the consent agenda has been passed. Next item is we have one proclamation this afternoon in recognition of the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. I'd like to welcome Ms. McKellen from the League of Women Voters that's joining us online. And then I would just take a moment to present the proclamation. It reads as follows. Whereas at the founding of the United States of America, the right to vote belonged only to land-owning white males over age 21. And whereas the right to vote is the cornerstone of our democracy and the fundamental right upon which all civil liberties rest. And Wisconsin women and their allies fought for the right to vote for more than a century before it was granted and garnered national attention for the suffrage efforts. And whereas this month commemorates the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution that guarantees all citizens of the United States the right to vote, regardless of sex. And whereas as we reflect on the history of women's suffrage, we recognize that the participation of women in the voting booth and in elected office strengthens our communities and our economy and enriches the American spirit. Now, therefore, I, Terry Weld, President of the Eau Claire City Council, on behalf of the entire City Council, do hereby proclaim August a month to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment and reaffirm our commitment to equity and to creating a city where all people can thrive. Ms. McClellan, are you there?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Oaks is going to speak first. I'm here to. Thank you for joining us to come and speak to you today on this wonderful occasion.
Can I ask you to speak a little closer to the microphone?
Closer to the microphone, got it. Thank you for inviting us to speak to you today. Anne Marie McClellan and I, Ellen Oaks, we are co-presidents of the League of Women Voters, Greater Chippewa Valley, based in Menominee, but including some surrounding counties. Ours is a pretty new chapter, having formed just 4 years ago. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan, no matter what they tell you. Whichever party has the most power at the moment tends to think that we are supporting the opposite party. We do not endorse candidates or political parties, but will take a firm stand on issues. In our short history, we have conducted public forums on student debt, redistricting, groundwater issues, clean energy, hazards of septic waste spreading, dark money, and local control, and many candidate forums, including 3 for Menominee School Board. We are tireless in registering and helping new voters and opposing voter oppression. We promote voter education. We always have. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Anne Marie McClellan.
Hi, this is Anne Marie McClellan, the other co-president of the League of Women Voters from the Greater Chippewa Valley chapter. We are honored to be here to accept this proclamation. Thanks to all the Eau Claire City Council members for taking time to recognize this momentous event, the ratification of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. It took the suffrage movement 72 years, multi-generations, for women to achieve the right to vote, something that seems so obviously fair in today's culture. The commemoration reminds us that our
not obviously.
I'm sorry?
No, I'm sorry,
Well,
go ahead.
It depends. From our point of view, it seems obviously fair that all adults should be able to vote. The commemoration reminds us that our Constitution and laws require reconsideration to ensure our governing rules and policies are relevant in today's world. As it is often said, democracy is not a spectator sport. Our communities need to stay active and participate in governance. We at the League of Women Voters are especially honored to be here today as it is the 100th anniversary of our organization. Carrie Chapman Catt formed the League of Women Voters as an outgrowth of the suffrage organization with the goal to educate all the newly enfranchised voters. Our mission today still includes education and advocacy. Our chapter is having a Zoom forum this evening to discuss the challenges of casting a vote this fall. Candidate forums are being planned for September. Candidate responses to issues are posted on the League's Vote 411 website. You can visit our League's chapter website to find more information on upcoming activities. And we thank you all for your invaluable service.
Thank you for your service. Okay, we can get started on our business agenda, beginning with agenda item number 9. A resolution authorizing operating budget appropriations for fiscal year 2020 and operating budget outlook for fiscal year 2021. Because this item amends the budget, a 2/3 vote or 8 affirmative votes is needed for passage. Good afternoon, Mr. Winzens.
Good afternoon, Council President Weld and members of the City Council. This agenda item is really divided into 2 parts. So I'm going to start with the operating budget appropriations and then pause and see if there are any questions. And then we'll start into the 2021 budget discussion. So the 2020 budget has been significantly impacted in certain areas due to COVID-19. So we've identified a number of those areas where additional appropriations are going to be necessary. And we thought it was timely to bring those to the City Council prior to the end of the year, since we have identified some concerns. The first of those is within the administrative services budget for elections. Two particular areas. One is overtime, and the other is postage. So we are recommending these appropriations from general fund balance to administration services, elections for these items. This will, we believe, provide sufficient funding, not only for the elections that have already occurred, but also for the upcoming November election. In addition, there are several other non-general fund budgets that are being impacted by COVID-19 and then indirectly end up impacting the general fund budget. One of those is Hobbs Ice Center. We've seen significant declines in revenue due to COVID-19. And as a result of those declines in revenue, we believe that the general fund subsidy to Hobbs will need to be increased from the amount originally budgeted by $50,000. As I believe members of the City Council are aware, Fairfax Pool did not open this year. Therefore, there really has not been any revenue for Fairfax Pool this year. At this time, we are estimating that an additional general fund subsidy to Fairfax Pool in the amount of $100,000 will be necessary to make up for that loss of revenue. And finally, within this category is the parking fund. The parking fund, we did not have any general fund subsidy budgeted this year for the parking fund, but are now estimating that that will require a general fund subsidy of $100,000 in order to make up for the lost revenue and cover the operating expenditures within that fund. The final appropriation is a non-COVID related appropriation, but is an appropriation to TID 12 from the general fund. And this is to move the payment in lieu of taxes that was made by Blue Gold Real Estate based upon the settlement, property tax settlement approved earlier by the City Council, to move that money from the general fund into the Water Street TID or TID number 12. Are there any questions on those 2020 budget appropriations?
Councilmember Berge?
Thank you, Council President. I was wondering if these for COVID-related appropriations, would they be eligible for the CARES Act funds that were distributed from the federal to states and hopefully to us?
The CARES funds cannot be used to make up for lost revenue. So the appropriations for Hobbs, Fairfax, and into the parking fund would not be eligible for CARES funding. The funding for elections, there are funds available through the state of Wisconsin to pay for some election-related expenses, and we will certainly be applying for those dollars when they are available. So some of the elections money may be made up through CARES funding, but the others cannot be.
Okay, thank you.
Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, Council President Wells. Mr. Winston, I have a question, and if you don't have the information today, it's totally fine. My question is around some of the COVID-related vacancies that occurred this summer. So staffing at Hobbs, staffing at Fairfax, et cetera, maybe other vacancies within our organization. What happened to the monies that were budgeted for their wages that didn't need to be realized? So what happened to that fund?
Yeah, I mean, any budgeted funds for positions that haven't been expended stay within those funds. Had those positions not been held vacant, the appropriations that we're having to make from the general fund would have been much more significant. Because those positions were held vacant, is why we're only talking about appropriations of $50,000 for Hobbs and $100,000 for Fairfax Pool. There are positions that are permanent full-time positions that are charged to all three of those budgets, but without any revenue. And again, I'm going to use Fairfax as an example. Without any revenue, the time for those full-time positions that are charged against Fairfax Pool, the costs for those personnel costs have to be made up for through the general fund.
Are there any other questions in regards to the appropriations? Councilmember Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, President Weld, and thank you, Mr. Winzens. I guess my question is just digging deeper into where we're finding some of this flexibility to fund, and I see that the term subsidy is used for Hobbs Ice Center, Fairfax Pool, Parking Fund. Essentially, my understanding is that CARES Act funding for transit was able to replace what we would have otherwise used general fund dollars for operating expenses, and that therefore that additional flexibility in our general fund was able to support Hobbs and Fairfax Pool and the parking fund in this way. Would that be accurate?
Not exactly. We are appropriating the funds for Hobbs, Fairfax, and the parking fund out of our existing fund balance. So those funds are available within our fund balance. Normally, those would only be allowed to be used for time expenditures such as capital, but clearly, these types of COVID-related expenditures are very much one-time in nature, because hopefully this will be the one and only pandemic that we have in any of our lifetimes. Now, at the end of the year, when we close out the year in December, to the extent that we don't need to make that transfer to transit because of the CARES funding that's available, those dollars will go back into our fund balance and will help replenish the amounts that we've had to withdraw for these subsidies. So it is, in a roundabout way, the CARES dollars are allowing us to replenish our fund balance, that a portion of which is being used for these additional subsidies.
Thank you. And if I have a follow-up question?
Certainly.
So essentially, we're not really going to know until the end of the year how much the overall reduction in general fund contribution toward transit will be?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions in regards to the appropriations for 2020? I do not see any, Mr. Winzens.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we will jump into the second part of this agenda item, which is to provide an update to the City Council on the status of the 2021 budget, and specifically to talk about some COVID-related impacts. Next slide, please. A couple of weeks ago, a article came out from the National League of Cities entitled City Fiscal Conditions. And this is an article that the National League of Cities has been putting together, I believe, for in excess of 30 years now. And it talks about the ability of cities or the confidence of city officials that they'll be able to meet the needs of their communities. There was a quote in the report that indicated that the findings in the report reveal that America's cities are experiencing the fiscal consequences of this pandemic downturn at an unprecedented speed. And like recent recessions, it will take years for municipal budgets to recover from the impact of COVID-19. And many of those consequences that are being seen on a national level, we're also seeing on a local level. Next slide, please. Within that report, they talk about the share of cities that are better and less able to meet their fiscal needs. So in this graph goes back to 1990, so it's 1990 through 2021. And the blue or kind of aqua into green portions of the bar are communities that feel that they are better able to meet their fiscal needs of their communities. And the purple portions of the bar are those communities that feel they are less able to meet the fiscal needs. And as you can see from this, from about 2010 through 2019, for the most part, communities felt that they were better able to meet the fiscal needs, their fiscal needs. However, you can see the dramatic change in 2020 with the onset of COVID-19 and a dramatic increase in the size of those purple bars for the communities that feel they're less able to meet their fiscal needs. In fact, you have to go back to the recession in 2008, 2009 to see numbers as low as this, and even going back to the early 1990s, the numbers weren't quite as low. Next slide, please. And here is some of that raw data. So communities surveyed, indicated that 78% of them indicated that they were less able to meet their needs in 2020, and that increases to 87% of communities less able to meet their needs in 2021. So as you can see, you need to go back to 2010 and 2009 to see numbers on this scale. Next slide, please. The report, interestingly, or at least I find it interesting, also breaks down the responses by types of primary sources of revenue. So it breaks it down into communities that are primarily property tax based, property and income tax, property and sales, property sales and income, and then just sales tax. And I guess what I find interesting here, and certainly Eau Claire is primarily a property tax-based revenue community, is that for 2020, which is the purple bar, those communities surveyed that were primarily property tax-based indicated 67% of them indicated that they were less able to meet their needs. And you can see down at the bottom with the sales tax communities, that's 85%. So those sales tax communities are more immediately affected by recessions as opposed to the property tax communities, which are a little bit more stable. However, the green bar, which represents 2021, shows that the property tax communities less able to meet their fiscal needs jumps to 89%, which is right up there with all the other communities that responded to this survey. Next slide, please. And this again shows the revenue loss estimation by tax structure. So property tax-based communities, which are the first series of bars, indicate that they're looking at a 10% loss estimation in those communities, whereas when you get into property and sales tax communities, they're looking at revenue losses in excess of 12 to 14%. Average across the board is about 13% revenue loss estimation on the high side and 3% on the low side. Next slide, please. So where we are at in our budget process is that departments have submitted their base budgets to us, to finance and to the city manager. And the base budget includes the funding necessary to provide the same service levels as in the prior year, or the same service levels as were budgeted in 2020. In addition, these include various personnel changes, such as an allowance for a cost of living increase of 2.5%, step increases, some increased costs for the Wisconsin retirement system, any turnover from the 2020 budget, health insurance rate increases, currently projected at 2%, and any anticipated utility cost increases. Next slide, please. As far as the challenges go, one of the challenges that became readily apparent is a decrease in our investment earnings. So this chart shows the local government investment pool earning rates from August of 2018 through July of 2020. And so from August of 18 through about August of 19, interest rates that we were receiving on our investments through the pool were between 2.5%. Those rates started dropping in September of 19 through about March of 2020, but we're still between 1.5% and 2%. And then you can see in March of 2020, really the bottom fell out of the market, and rates dropped from a little bit over 1.5% to 0.14%, and have been at that level really since May of 2020. I'll talk a little bit later about how this is impacting the 2021 budget. Next slide, please. In terms of other impacts, certainly recreation program fees have been significantly impacted, and we expect will continue to be impacted into 2021. Little bit of that is unknown at this point about when we may be able to reestablish those programs and have regular program sizes, but nevertheless, we expect that they will be impacted. Parking, our parking fund, will continue to be impacted for the foreseeable future. We have received feedback from businesses within the downtown that have contracts with us that they will be continuing their contract at the minimum required. Many of those businesses had been leasing stalls in excess of the minimum within their contract. It's also foreseeable that businesses that have contracts, when those come due for renewal, may renew at a lower guaranteed number of stalls. And the less revenue that we receive into the parking fund forces an increase in the general fund subsidy. Hobbs Ice Center, there's not going to be any UWEC hockey played this year. Don't know at this point whether or not the high schools will be playing hockey. But even if the high schools are playing hockey, at least likely in the first half of 2021, we won't have spectators in the same numbers that we have historically had. We are planning at this point for spectators to be able to return in the third quarter of 2021. Next slide, please. Fairfax Pool. Again, lots of question marks. Will it open? Will we be able to open the pool in May, or will the pool opening need to be delayed or canceled again? And even if we are able to open it, will customers return to the pool in the same numbers that they have in the past? Will that consumer confidence be there? Within our transit system, when can buses be filled to capacity? And what's going to happen with the UWEC contract? Those are both questions that are unanswered at this point. But certainly our inability to be able to fill the buses to capacity is creating issues for UWEC. State shared revenues. The word on the street, if you will, is that because we're in the second year of a biennial budget, that shared revenues, the 2021 shared revenues, will not be affected. However, we'll have to wait and see what happens in the next biennial budget, because we know that revenues to the state of Wisconsin from sales tax are down significantly. State transportation aids. We know that during this pandemic, people have been traveling less, and state transportation aids are funded through the gasoline tax. With fewer dollars available, we're unsure at this point what 2021 may hold for state transportation aids. Next slide, please. So jumping into the numbers a little bit. Again, this is pretty high level, but just want to update the City Council on where we're at. Based upon our net new construction, the maximum amount that we can increase the property tax levy for operations is 1.92%. That translates into about $586,000. We're anticipating additional revenue for the regional ambulance service at about $275,000. Anticipating a decrease in revenue for recreation program fees of about $120,000. Decreased investment earnings of about $618,000. Decrease in our communications center reimbursement. Now that's driven by expenditures and the formula we have the formula agreement we have with the county, but that's going to be going down by about $124,000. Overall, for the general fund revenue picture, we're expecting a revenue increase of $65,000. So that $65,000 needs to cover quite a number of anticipated cost increases. Next slide, please. So we are currently budgeting wage increase at 2.5% cost of living plus step increases. That has a cost of about $632,000. Health insurance projecting a 2% rate increase is $293,000. A little bit of savings on retiree health insurance. That's estimated to go down by about $186,000. Our computer service charges are going up about $145,000. We're expecting that transit operating assistance will go down by $140,000, and this is due to CARES funds being available to offset some of the transit costs for next year. Some other changes, just again, miscellaneous small changes. And so we're anticipating that on the expenditure side, we're looking at an expenditure increase of $503,000. Next slide, please. No new positions or service modifications are included in these numbers. These, again, are just the base budgets that have been submitted by departments, adjusted for those items that I mentioned previously. So at the present time, our budget is out of balance by about $436,500. Now, I believe that we have some areas in which to look within the budget, and I fully expect that between now and the time that the city manager submits his recommended budget to the city council, we'll have that gap closed to zero. But it is a very tight budget, and I wanted to provide this update to the city council to let you all know where we're at, and that there are some real economic consequences associated with COVID in this pandemic that are significantly affecting our ability to fund new positions or new services in 2021. So with that, I would be happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions from council? Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Winston, for your work on this. I think it's incredibly timely and a very sobering picture that you're painting, and I think it's accurate. So I certainly appreciate your work on this. Would you be able to have somebody please send us this presentation? For some reason, my slides weren't advancing on my device. That would be helpful for me.
Yeah, absolutely. We can send it out, and we will get it posted on our website as well.
Okay, thank you. My question that I have for you is around, I guess, timing of when council will be engaging with the manager on, and you, on scoping out the 2021 budget. I understand that you've already met with departments and have a good preliminary sense of things, but really if there's any directions that council wants to take, what is your time frame that you would anticipate council would have those discussions?
Our current expectation, and I'll certainly, I guess, defer to the city manager for any specifics, but we were expecting to be basically on the same schedule as we have been in the past, with the distribution to city council in early October. But I'll let Mr. Peters chime in.
Yes, thank you for that question. So we're working to prepare a balanced budget, and as Mr. Winston said, present it in early October, and then we would have, I think there's 3 or 4 work sessions, where the council can go through and learn about the budget and and work through it in any way they want. To the extent that we would have a pre-meeting and council wanted to, provide some thoughts or perspectives, I guess I would consider this the pre-budget meeting light, and this would be actually a good time if there are things that council wanted to, I guess, have us be considering. And I'm already aware, based upon the conversations that happened with the and around the capital improvement budget, that there's interest in EDI type function or position, as well as some co-response and shifting within the police department and Hmong Liaison. So this is actually that opportunity, given the situations there. If the council, and this would also be an opportunity, if the council wanted a standalone work session, kind of pre-budget, we could schedule that. It would happen relatively soon, but we thought, given the situation and that is there with the economics, that we would do this presentation tonight and have the conversation and see if there was feedback that the council wanted to provide. But if you wanted to have a larger work session, kind of pre submission of a balanced budget to you, that would have to be a separate meeting.
Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld and Mr. Winston and Mr. Peters. I guess I would be interested in, seeing if, I'm somewhat interested in having a work session just because that's part of, I guess, my broader expectation. Obviously, this is not a normal year, but I wasn't really prepared necessarily at this juncture to provide ideas for changes just because I thought it was meant to be a pretty brief overview. But so I'd be open to spending the time on a work session just to give that, just to put that out there at this point. I also just had a question about what exactly we're approving here. My understanding would be that the section of the document for 2020 operating budget outlook, like basically that page 39 of our packet, most of that would not necessarily be part of the resolution that we're passing. It's just broader context, and all the numbers above it are what we're approving.
Yeah, that's correct, Councilmember Gregor. The resolution that's included within the packet on page 37 would just includes those 2020 operating budget appropriations, does not include the budget outlook for 2021.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just as a follow-up to that, I noticed that there was a typo on the dollar amount for revenue that was corrected in your presentation, that to reflect 65,500 as the revenues in the positive, as opposed to the 66,500. So that would essentially maybe be something that could be corrected for the records.
You're correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Council Vice President, did you have?
Thank you so much. I'm a little torn if we have another work session just because time is of the essence, and we've canceled our Monday meeting in September for our first meeting. However, if there's a way to have a work session, I certainly would be supportive of that, even if it's brief, just to give people a little bit more time to think about what they'd like to share. I guess not knowing what's going to happen with the work session or not, I would like to just publicly share and lift up Mr. Peters. I think your accurate reading of a desire of at least some on council, I don't know about everybody, to see really a leadership position created that's dedicated to EDI issues. I wish we could bring on a whole team of people that were working on this, but I really feel that it's important to establish some dedicated leadership in our cities who can help them put together a team, whether that's building our existing workforce and their skills to our community and our community skills, or maybe when it's possible to expand the workforce to have coordinator type positions. But at this point, I think it's really imperative that, given the direction our community is going and the fact that COVID and our anti-racist work that disproportionately affects minority communities, I think it's really essential that we look very seriously at a permanent full-time position that has leadership within the city to help scope out and affect changes of how we do this work.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Gregor.
Yeah, thank you, President Weld. The other, I guess, question I would have about the work session is kind of related to how we have our commissions and committees involved in the budget process. For example, does Transit Commission review the operating budget, for transit, and also the fee schedule, for example? I guess I would be interested in the fee schedule being something that we also make sure we're keeping in mind here with regard to the work session or any input from our committees or commissions. I just wanted to raise that too.
Any other comments or questions in regards to 2021? Any other discussion around a work session from council members?
If I could, Council President Weld, I would just, again, given the, I guess the challenges that are there, and we're certainly willing to have a work session if that's if you want to do it. And the reason I expressed that, I'm aware of those three priorities or certainly interests from the council on the EDI, the co-response for PD, and the Hmong Liaison, and we're looking at all three of those topics carefully as we also look at closing, close to a $500,000 budget gap. So I guess we do have the time tonight, and again, we can hold a standalone separate work session, which would essentially be this presentation again, and further opportunities to provide input. But this would also be an opportunity to provide some input, and I guess I just wanted to emphasize that we're very aware of those three issues of interest to the council and doing what we can with them.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Councilmember Beaton.
Thank you, Council President. Thought I would just weigh in here since the city manager and city finance director are seeking input. I guess I would echo what's been said. I would also like to have a little bit more time to discuss this, but I do also want to recognize the timeline that we're on right now, and the fact that we have even less of a margin to to imagine new things with than we normally do. I guess I would respect if that that work session is maybe not possible, and do appreciate the time now to talk about it a little bit. I would reiterate my support, which I've expressed before, for an EDI position in this moment in particular. I think it's hard to prioritize, but I guess that would be my highest priority right now. And out of all the things that the city manager mentioned, I'd love to see all of those things happen. But if I were to prioritize, if we could have one thing in 2021, that would be it.
Thank you for that feedback.
Any other? Councilmember Zhang.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Mr. Peters, for bringing this up. It is crucial work, and I'm very excited that these are some of the things that we are considering this year for 2021. I'm going to have to echo that we've since long worked really hard on uplifting the anti-racist community, and we do need to have that EDI person. If we are able to have a working session, I very much appreciate that, with council being able to briefly discuss this topic. But if we're able to prioritize, again, I would say the EDI, and for us to really commit and putting a plan for making the other things happen. And so not just letting it drop, but really committing to putting it on the timeline for 2022, or making it happen sometime down the road so we can have that. But the EDI is very, it's a first start, and that person would really give the direction of how the city should be operating under that. So just my thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback.
Councilmember Christopherson.
Thank you, President Weld. Thank you, Mr. Winzens, for all of this wonderful work, and Mr. Peters for the direction. The only piece that I would also propose is, in this very unusual time, almost it's an emergent time, that some of these items really could be co-funded by institutional entities in our community, And I would encourage you as a leader to see if there are ways that we could collaborate on some of those positions that really do open up our community to greater diversity, greater collaboration, and a changing culture. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, partnerships are certainly being explored as a way of being able to move towards some of those priorities that are being expressed by the council.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you all for this conversation. I just have a quick comment and a question. I also want to reiterate the support for an EDI position, and then sort of, if we can, figure out a down-the-road plan for some of these other positions. And I'm pleased to hear that that those are part of the conversation, even as we're facing this gap that we're trying to close. My question is regarding like the work session. I don't have a strong opinion on whether we should have one or not, but I'm curious if in the past when we've looked at budgets, there's been conversations around, well, what would be the things to adjust or to cut? Is that a conversation that Mr. Peters, that you would anticipate having in a work session, or is the budget just sort of not at that point of at this point? I'm just kind of trying to figure out what that conversation would be like, or what would kind of the stakes of the conversation be. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question. Historically, there really hasn't been a pre-budget conversation. As you're aware, as manager, I'm statutorily required to provide a balanced budget to the council, and the council then will learn about it with some depth and detail, and then is certainly at their pleasure able to amend it or change it, in any way they want through their legislative process. So that's the statutory component to it. The last few years, we have had some conversation, going into it to kind of get a sense of where some of the priorities might be, and also to reaffirm some of the base assumptions that go into this budget. So if you recall the presentation from Mr. Winzens, there's some base assumptions in there around our levy capacity, around our wage increases and things like that. And so really what we're looking for is not the nitty-gritty or diving deep into it in any way. It's a high-level conversation about some of the base principles that go into the budget, which again, those were all kind of discussed or presented tonight, as well as, if there's some kind of key, bigger types of things that you're looking for me as the manager to try to address or to work with the budget. So ultimately it's the manager's decision as to what the manager feels is the appropriate balanced budget to bring forward to the council. It's nice when the manager's budget can align relatively closely with the council's priorities, and so really that's the opportunity to just make sure that on those really fundamental core things related to a budget, those big bucket items, that we're aligned there, and I haven't heard any conversation about not being aligned there. And then to the extent that there are changes that you'd like me to be considering, that those are just voiced and out there. And so again, I'm aware of those three, and really the work session would only be around whether or not there are other things out there that haven't already been expressed. So I guess what I'm hearing is if there's concurrence with the primary tenets of the budget, and you've been able to express some of the things that you'd like to see change, if they can be worked in, then that's really the purpose of the pre-budget conversation. And again, given the kind of the scope of where we're at with the financial challenges, as well as just the other things that are going on, and quite frankly, the challenges that are likely ahead of us as it relates to the opening of schools and other challenges related to COVID. We just wanted to see if kind of pre-budget work session light could get the job done, but we certainly can schedule a work session and put that into the mix if that's the pleasure. So hopefully that answered your question, Councilmember Anderson.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm hearing that what I'm hearing is that most of the information that needs to be shared has been shared, kind of both ways. I think for me the only other piece of information that could potentially be useful is more time for public conversation. But it sounds like the most urgent element, which is additional financial resources, is really the big question here. So thank you.
That's correct. I mean, the public input will come later when the manager's budget is available for the public to review and to look at, as well as the 3 or 4 work sessions that will be scheduled for you to take a deeper look and understanding to it before you would go through your adoption process in November.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Zhang.
Thank you, Council President. I just realized, Mr. Pierce, I just want to express my thoughts. I think I've shared this with you, but in regards to the Hmong, the request for a Hmong Liaison culture, and I just want to put out my thoughts there as we continue to work on budgets and we look at it. Have you looked more into the various positions that are vacant or that will be vacant, and making sure that within the institution and within our organizations, we are very diverse and have people in place that are going to be culturally competent when we have folks entering our doors? I think that's when we talk about putting these liaisons in, I think we're talking about having cultural brokers. And I see that we will continue to need these services even post-COVID, going that, my thoughts prediction is that we will have an economic downturn, another fiscal impact, and, next year around this time, if things haven't calmed down with the unemployment and with the economic crisis that we currently have due to COVID, that we're going to have higher, families who's going to be needing help with this from the city or coming in, whether it's regarding their water bill, whatever it is that they need services with the city. That's not just going to be the Hmong community. It's going to be, we need people who could speak Spanish on board and various other languages, so that we could service them as a growing city. And we will anticipate that we will have a growing population that will have those needs. Have you looked in that, worked with HR on that? I'm just kind of curious on the thoughts of that.
Yes.
Councilmember Worthman.
Thank you, Council President Weld. Yeah, I would like to second Councilmember Zhang, thinking about how we accomplish that, and also thinking forward into next year, recognizing that we're probably going to continue to see declining revenues, but an increased need in our community for support from all different folks. So that's one thing that I'd like to highlight. I also want to second people's comments around the value of having EDI focus and looking at our co-responders. How do we phase that in? How do we make that work at the police department is really important to me. So I want to just kind of second all of the things that have been previously mentioned as priorities, not just for me, but things that I've heard in our community that folks have been asking for and talking about.
Thank you for that. And yes, the COVID response is in there, and we are doing work on how not only to what happens in 2021 for that, but how do we lay out a plan going forward? That's going to be a shift that's going to take some time, and we need to lay the groundwork for that and the plan for how we're going to shift that, so that we have we have a co-response, and then also that co-response has the depth and quality that we want in the community. So we've got some ideas on that that hopefully will be, we're excited about some of the ideas that we're working on related to that will be coming forward. And then, and also I fully recognize that the Hmong Liaison, is a part of, and Councilmember Zhang, I liked your term culture broker, but how do we work with the organization so that it's not one person? We're not relying on just one person to be able to interact effectively with the multiple languages and cultures that are that we want in our community. So looking at that also in a long-term way, and what are we able to do in this current environment in 21? But it lays out a roadmap and a path forward, as well as making some some real progress in 21 on all three of those issues. Three issues being EDI, the co-response, and the Hmong Liaison.
Councilmember Berge.
Thank you, Council President. And thank you, Mr. Peters and Mr. Winsens, for this conversation. Just about the work session, I could go either way, but I'm comfortable using tonight as well to share thoughts. And these are my thoughts I've been writing down. But I think that, as we know, that a budget is a statement of an organization's values. And we talked a lot this year, or more than this year, about how important it is for Eau Claire to be a welcoming city for all. So I think having this reflected in our budget, because I think it's, we're not just talking the talk, but we're walking the walk, and following up our conversations with action. So I would like to see this somehow reflected in the budget, whether it be an EDI position or services or a Hmong Liaison person, but just to see it in the budget, I think is important. And then just with the co-response, I'm just really curious to see what that would look like. I think that's a fantastic idea to combine mental health with our police officers. I think I'm just really curious to see how that will turn out. So, and maybe even a little excited to look at that. So, thank you.
Thank you. And although there'll be much more information coming out, but the work on the transformation project will also tie into the that welcoming work that we're doing, not only as a city organization, but as a city, as a community.
Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld, and thank you, Mr. Peters and Mr. Winsens. Yeah, I mean, since we're diving in here, I certainly will partake, as I typically do, in discussions. So maybe we really don't necessarily need a work session, but I may need a little time here. I certainly support the director level, equity, diversity, and inclusion position as really the top priority, because I think, having a leadership position helps us explore these other really important pieces of being a city that is as responsive as possible to our responsibilities to everyone in the community. I do also want to mention something that we've been talking about year to year with regard to our operating budget, and that is the cost of bus fares. 2 years ago we we as a council passed resolutions, essentially with the intent of, exploring reducing fares in particular for people who either qualified based on income or self-certified based on income to get the same fares for individual rides as well as monthly passes as people who would qualify based on being a senior or being a person with disabilities. So that was one piece of it, and the other piece that we have been discussing for a couple of years has been, potentially eliminating fares for K through 12 kids. One of the ways I look at this is I look at how maybe transit is finding efficiencies. One of them being how much we have to spend on diesel. Obviously, probably the biggest, variable to that is the price of diesel, and that has obviously gone down over the last couple of years. But there's also, moving toward hybrid buses, which we just had a couple more come online, and we're going to have a couple more come online in the coming year. That'll reduce the cost, the operating cost from a diesel fuel standpoint, and then eventually electric vehicles. And in fact, we're budgeting capital dollars for the infrastructure to be able to have electric buses in the near future, within the next 5 years. So I kind of look at that, at long term, if we're going to be saving money on diesel, I think we can maybe pass that along to riders in a more of a direct way to the riders who need it the most, who need reduced fares. So that's why I mentioned the fare or the fee schedule as being an important part of this discussion. Obviously, I've been relatively patient and not on this issue. I don't even actually have cost estimates from city staff yet with regard to, what, these changes in fares would cost. And obviously, it's hard to estimate that because we're seeing such variability in ridership now due to the virus and just the ability to actually have people safely ride in larger numbers. So just wanted to raise that as I do annually, I guess you could say. But I understand, this is the most difficult year to bring it up that I've experienced as a council member. So just something to keep in mind is that sometimes we're seeing savings in our departments, and maybe that savings should be kept in-house somehow to benefit the riders or the users of the service. And just one other point, as I mentioned earlier, there was significant CARES Act dollars that went to transit that, allowed for flexibilities in other areas of the city, and which I think is great. I mean, I hope that transit would be able to benefit, from flexibility found in other areas in the future. But, the CARES Act dollars were $5.3 million for transit in Eau Claire, which is a huge deal and is helping us a lot. And it obviously doesn't help us 5 or 10 years from now when we're talking about an operating budget that would have to reflect any fare changes. But just wanted to put that out there as something that I'm still interested in.
Thank you. Appreciate that feedback, and you of course identified the challenge with the CARES funding is that it's a one-time money and on an ongoing basis to be fiscally sustainable. We have to have matching revenues to matching expenses. So using that CARES dollar money for one-time situations is very appropriate, but would not be recommended for committing us to a long-term situation that would then need revenue sometime in the future. So that is the challenge with that, and I appreciate the feedback and reminder. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or comments or questions from council? Council Vice President.
Thank you so much. Just had a couple other thoughts in regards to the EDI director level position. And I also want to appreciate and lift up the idea of having that commitment that we're going to be staging this work out over the next couple of years. I think that's really important. I think for kind of a practical note, to me, if we were to see this position come back, I would be totally understanding if it was for the first year at a 0.75 FTE, or if it's a 1.0 FTE but only funded for 75% of the year. Just given the fact that cross our fingers, we're able to have a successful city manager search. I think realistically, by the time the new manager comes on board, has a chance to scope out that position, post it, interview, I suspect it would be a national search, and then hire and have somebody start. I couldn't see that person starting before March 1st. So it seems that we could have a little bit of time of salary savings for this first year, which isn't ideal for ongoing, but it's kind of where we're at, and I think, that could work, and I would totally think that would be reasonable. The other is that I need to reach out to the manager and just kind of follow up on a community conversation that I had. But that really is around some non-fiscal options that we could be looking at for some of our EDI-related work. So, I'm thinking about having a coordinator or a liaison, which I think is very valuable for our community. If we can't afford it right now, are there other ways that we can be doing some of that work, such as a language access plan, making sure that basically there's no wrong door for anybody to come to the city, regardless of the language that they speak. And so I think that there's some other ways that we could try to meet in the middle that would be meaningful and effective to people who are trying to serve and operate within some of the fiscal realities that we have. So, thank you.
Thank you for that feedback.
Any other comments or questions from council? I do not see any other hands being raised.
If I could, Council President Weld, then I would just like to express my appreciation for the council having the conversation, and I know somewhat abbreviated, but it really is helpful in terms of just the management of our time with all the different balls that we have in the air right now, and I hope that all of you felt you had an opportunity to be able to express your thoughts on this, and I just appreciate that, and I also appreciate the flexibility in doing it just a little bit differently this year, as we are with so many things due to just the constraints that COVID is putting on all of us. So thanks again for your time and your feedback this evening on that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. So back to the agenda item number 9, and again, the resolution authorizing operating budget appropriations for fiscal year 2020. If there are no other questions, then on a motion by Councilmember Beaton and seconded by Councilmember Zhang, this item is moved. Is there any discussion in regards to the 2020 appropriations? Seeing no discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Beaton?
Aye.
Berge?
Aye.
Christofferson?
Aye.
Emmanuel?
Aye.
Gregert?
Aye.
Klinkhammer?
Aye.
Lohr?
Aye.
Weld?
Aye.
Worthman?
Aye.
Zhang?
Aye.
Anderson?
Aye.
And that item passes unanimously. Agenda item number 10 is a resolution granting a permanent encroachment to the property owner of 336 Water Street for siting. Good afternoon, Ms. Ness, or good evening, I should say.
Good evening. The owner of 336 Water Street, more commonly referenced as the Goat Coffee House, is requesting an encroachment for exterior siding into the right-of-way on Water Street. They recently did some exterior renovations to their building, and with those changes realized that the siding that they had picked is going to be approximately an inch into the right-of-way. So the resolution that is written and attached in the packet is for a 1 foot by 27.1 feet width of the lot, and it would meet the encroachment that the owner is asking for. They have already met the outlined conditions of providing insurance and indemnification of the city, and they understand the removal of the encroachment at their expense within 10 days of receiving notice. Laura Bemnister is available for questions if you have any of hers, and I can stand for any questions that you may have.
Are there any questions for Ms. Ness?
What's shown on your screen is the encroachment of the siding into the sidewalk.
I do not see any questions. Thank you very much. On a motion then by Councilmember Lohr and seconded by Councilmember Christopherson, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Berge.
Aye.
Christopherson.
Aye.
Emmanuel.
Aye.
Gregert.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Lohr.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Beaton.
Aye.
And that item passes unanimously. Agenda item number 11 is a resolution granting an extension of a temporary encroachment to the property owner at 204 East Grand Avenue for a construction shoot through September 30, 2020. Ms. Ness.
Good evening again. The owner of 204 East Grand Avenue, the Grand, has requested a temporary encroachment for a construction shoot over Graham Avenue, and that's indicated on the map. You can see on the east side of Graham Avenue, the west side of 204 East Grand Avenue. Staff has been working with this owner and contractor to provide temporary permits to complete the construction since February of 2016. The temporary permits that staff issues are no longer valid due to the time frame of this project. We bring this forward today at the request of the owner to keep the chute available through the demolition process of this construction project, and anticipate that the completion will be at the end of September of 2020. The owner indicated that the change was in relation to construction changes and financing that delayed the project. The attached resolution, as stated, extends the permit through September 30th of 2020. Mr. Johnson or Mr. Padernos are available online if there's any questions for them, and I can stand for any questions. On your screen, you can see the construction chute that is attached to the building over the right-of-way on Graham Avenue.
Are there any questions from council for Ms. Ness? I do not see any questions. Thank you. On a motion then by Council Vice President Emmanuel and seconded by Councilmember Berge, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Christopherson.
Aye.
Emmanuel.
Aye.
Gregert.
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
Aye.
Lohr.
Aye.
Weld.
Aye.
Worthman.
Aye.
Zhang.
Aye.
Anderson,
Aye.
Beaton,
Aye.
Berge.
Aye.
And that item passes unanimously. Agenda item number 12 is a resolution extending the emergency declaration in the city of Eau Claire. Mr. Peters, did you have any additional information you wish to share?
No, nothing more to add than we talked about earlier. This would extend the emergency declaration through September 22nd. It adopts the August 20th Health Department order, continues to allow the flexibility for remote meetings, and provides that executive flexibility so that we can respond to the COVID-19 conditions as they change.
Are there any questions from council for Mr. Peters? Council Vice President.
Thank you so much. Mr. Peters, when you gave a presentation earlier, you indicated that staff is looking at some options for council to consider. And I'm wondering, do you foresee a time where we're still going through COVID where we will not have an emergency declaration?
Yes. So to the extent that the emergency declaration has allowed the flexibility, and as we approach, I guess, the new normal, the things that are being supported by the emergency order, like the remote meetings and the health department order, can be supported through other means and through standalone ordinances. And so we're exploring some of those aspects of the new normal that can be dealt with on a standalone basis, and looking towards a time where we'd be able to bring things to the council to be able to react. That the timeliness wouldn't need to be quite so short, right, between two weeks between meetings, and that we'd be able to bring things to council in more of a normal fashion rather than the emergency status.
Okay, thank you. And then as a follow-up, do you have indication of when you think we might be ready to transition to that? Understanding it's likely an estimate, not
Sure.
stone by any means.
I think that will depend on our bringing our ability to wrap up these other issues. So, but this fall sometime.
Any other questions for Mr. Peters? I do not see any. Thank you.
Thank you.
On a motion then by Councilmember Worthman and seconded by Councilmember Gregert, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Emmanuel,
Aye.
Gregert,
Aye.
Klinkhammer,
Aye.
Lohr,
Aye.
Weld,
Aye.
Worthman,
Aye.
Zhang,
Aye.
Anderson,
Aye.
Beaton,
Aye.
Berge,
Aye.
Christofferson.
Aye.
And that item passes unanimously. Agenda item number 13, we have two ordinances for action. This ordinance is a rezoning of the property located at southwest corner of Old Town Hall Road and Graff Road from TR1A to R2P and R3P, and to adopt the general development plan for the duplexes, twin homes, and multifamily residential. Does council have any additional questions for Mr. Allen from last night's presentation? Seeing none, on a motion then by Councilmember Anderson and seconded by Councilmember Klinkhammer, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Gregor.
Thank you, President Weld. Thank you to Mr. Allen and Ms. Ness, Mr. Poultry, who have also helped me out in my Plan Commission role in this. Still struggling a little bit with just the location of this development, and I did vote against it at Plan Commission, although I've learned more since then, which is a benefit of having two cracks at it. I did also, for full disclosure, received a call from Steve Wiggins from Wurzer Builders, and we talked a little bit yesterday about some of the steep slopes area on the northwest of the property. So learned a bit more about that. Obviously we saw a bit last night about, future plans for the area to the southwest, which I wasn't aware of at Plan Commission. And it's nice to have that as context for council. I also had a call with city staff last week talking through the comprehensive plan and the bike and pedestrian plan and some of the county and town plans. And, one of the aspects of this that hasn't really been mentioned is that this is considered pretty prime farmland. That's obviously a value in this region too. So just something that kind of came up in that discussion. One of the things that I struggle with the most, I guess, about the location is that, one of the strategic objectives within our strategic plan that I, took the initiative to propose to be included is the objective to reduce reliance on automobile transportation. And this location for a development really, is going to be a very automobile dependent location to be able to access the rest of the city. Obviously, we heard a bit about what it could take to help increase that connectivity, and there is certainly a way to connect with the rest of the city for people to at least bicycle into town down Old Town Hall Road. And a little bit of a story here about Bike Week. I think it was 2013. I was on the committee, and we in order to promote Bike Week and commuting to work, Bike to Work Week aspect of it there was a resident of Prairie Park who I knew who had never ridden their bike to work before downtown to ride from. We had them, have a news crew from, I think it was News 18, actually follow their adventure on their first bicycle commute to work from Prairie Park, which is located on Highway 53 and is a relatively new development at that time. And they had to ride their bike down Old Town Hall Road, across 93, bridge over 94, and then weave their way through the neighborhoods of downtown. And, it is a distance, a bit of an adventure, but something that, is doable. So just trying to think about that transportation context, as I mentioned last night, is a little bit what I struggle with. But aside from that, I do actually have a motion to amend the general development plan, which I could introduce now, unless there's some substantive discussion before that. But I'm not sure if that's available on a slide that the council could see.
It is. Yep. We can put the motion for the amendment up on the screen here.
Thank you. So I think it makes sense to introduce this now, and these are what I would consider pretty minor, suggestions and conditions for the general development plan. Obviously, the general development plan is kind of early in the process, so it's easier to make these kind of changes now, and just to outline them. In the staff report is to include 2 bullet points. One of them, preserve trees on the western slope and south property line where feasible. So essentially, if it is possible to save some trees, there's not many on this site, to do so. So that's almost more of a suggestion, it seems like. The second bullet point is increased connectivity of the trail system to include convenient bicycle and pedestrian access to communities / pods 3 and 8 and to Graff Road. And I guess if we go back to that general development plan, you can see where 3 and 8 are. And so 3 and 8 are kind of on the east, the senior development, and some kind of smaller multifamily buildings, and then Graff Road is on the east. So that trail that's in red, essentially the motion is, asking that those trails connect to Graff Road, as well as to make sure those communities are included in access to a trail system. And obviously it's great to have a trail system proposed, but I think this just makes it a little bit better. So I know Councilmember Worthman said that he would second this, so I can let him speak as well.
I was just going to seek your second if I could. So
I'd like to second.
All right. So Councilmember Worthman is the second.
I'd like to second that motion.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Greger, or Councilmember Greger, did you have anything else you wish to add to them?
Yeah, thank you, President Weld. Yeah, I think it's really, I guess, self-explanatory. Thanks for the opportunity to explain it earlier. I think these are just some basic things that just make it a little bit more of just helps me be more comfortable with the development here. That's just me personally. So just putting this out there for folks.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Worthman, did you have?
Yeah, I'll just add, I think it's important to make sure that we're thinking about accessibility. And this is one of the concerns every time we're looking at building on the south side of 94 is just that we need to continue to think about how we make sure that we're connecting our city services. So that's kind of in the spirit of that I support this.
All right, thank you. Is there any other discussion or any other discussion in regards to the amendment? Seeing none, then we have an amendment regarding the motion there before you. And Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Gregert,
Aye.
Klinkhammer,
Aye.
Lohr,
Aye.
Weld,
Aye.
Worthman,
Aye.
Zhang,
Aye.
Anderson,
Aye.
Beaton,
Aye.
Berge,
Aye.
Christofferson,
Aye.
Emmanuel.
Aye.
And that amendment passes unanimously. Again, back to the original ordinance of the rezoning of the property. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Worthman, did you have?
I did. Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to make sure to raise the issue of affordability. This is something that we have, as a council, talked about and prioritized. And, my understanding is that so many of the professions that people work, especially in the area that we're talking about, are usually not the highest paying positions in our city. And so, we have to think about wages and how wages impact affordability for our community. While we can't require language, I would like to just strongly encourage the developers to think about in the proposal to include the definition of workforce housing as housing that is affordable to households earning 60 to 120% of the county median income. And I think that by their inclusion of that, it would help send a signal to their intent, which is really to make sure that it's affordable in different price points. So again, this is not an amendment as much as it is a strong encouragement of the developers to consider including such language.
Thank you, Councilmember Worthman. Is there any other discussion in regards to the Councilmember Gregor?
Yeah, thank you, President Weld. And, I certainly agree that that was a point of discussion at Plan Commission as well as, it is great that workforce housing is intended here, and it would be nice to have more information and long-term commitment to that moving forward here. Another thing that came up at Plan Commission that I appreciated that was brought up was, just looking at this site as in the layout of the buildings to make sure that they're oriented in such a way that it maximizes the ability, even if solar panels are not included with the project initially, they would be easy to install on south-facing rooftops of the building. So just orienting the buildings in such a way that make them solar ready is something I'd certainly want to encourage again at this juncture, as the details of this project move forward. Also, going back to my concerns, about transportation, public transit is going to be difficult to bring out here. And there's obviously some investments in potentially a new bridge across I-94 that we all need to be cognizant of here. If we were to approve this today, I'm thinking, our comprehensive plan says that this is a place for growth of this type. So it's sometimes hard to argue with that, but a lot of us were not around when that plan was finalized either. So, so I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I'm likely going to support this ultimately, but I have a lot of reservations about our ability as a city to accommodate this neighborhood in all the ways that other residents would be able to benefit from our city. So it's just going to take some work over the years here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gregor. Councilmember Christopherson.
Thank you, President Weld. I'd like to just take a broader look and sharing some of my information that I've gained from being a new council member. I'm also on the Plan Commission, and this is something that I voted against the annexation, and I voted against this development as well, but I am going to support this development in front of council. And I'll just share briefly how I arrived at that. One of the things I try to make myself aware of is when these infrastructure to this development needs to be replaced, how is the city going to be able to afford that? And this density of development provides a denser tax increment that allows us to be affording in the 50 to 80 years when we need to replace that to be able to do that. So that's part of why our comprehensive plan invites multi-use here. But I also have to say, in the same way that Councilmember Gregor looked at connectivity, there's some really significant highways that have now become impediments to the way that we connect with this part of our growing city. And I can't help but think, I'm in District 4, which is on the west side. I'm on 7th Street, and I'm on the North Crossing pretty regularly, much more than I am down in this part of our city on 93 South. And it reminds me really very much about how disconnected we were from the north side of our community before we were able to make that infrastructure change and really connect the north side closely and conveniently to the rest of our community. And I think this is a real-time experience where we're seeing how our growth and our needs to develop as a community cause these other stretching opportunities for later. I know that the state and I know that the county looks much farther down the road as far as anticipating what these developments are going to be. And I know that on somebody's desk, there's a little pencil scratch of where this is going, where this bridge is going to be, where these new connections are going to happen. But we will also have to make decisions about those very large investments at that time. So this has been a growing point for me to see how it is that we plan our growth, anticipate growth, challenge ourselves to grow. But I will support this, just knowing that we are on the very front end of something that's going to change us significantly over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Christopherson. Any other discussion from council? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Klinkhammer,
Aye.
Lohr,
Aye.
Weld,
Aye.
Worthman,
Aye.
Zhang,
Aye.
Anderson,
Aye.
Beaton,
Aye.
Berge,
Aye.
Christopherson,
Aye.
Emmanuel,
Aye.
Gregert.
Aye.
And that item passes unanimously. Agenda item number 14 is an ordinance amending Chapter 6.15 entitled Keeping of Poultry of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Eau Claire. Does council have any questions from last night's presentation? Seeing none, on a motion then by Councilmember Beaton and seconded by Councilmember Zhang, this item is moved. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Worthman.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to weigh in with a few things about this item. And I think first and foremost is just to point out that this original ordinance, when it came forward, had been worked on with a lot of different stakeholders and individuals and organizations, and I think was, really an attempt to figure out how we can make sure that people who would like to keep poultry, whether for environmental reasons or for food security or thinking about the cost of food in their household, had access to chicken keeping. And I think we've clearly come up in a situation where it would be. I think we can agree that there needs to be some changes made on this ordinance. I think my concern, though, is that the changes being sought are in some ways not helpful to reducing the barriers of access for people. And the more I received input, actually since the newspaper article came out, a number of people then started reaching out to me, including people who already keep chickens and have done so successfully without any issues, saying this is going to be difficult, and this is, you're asking me to do a lot here by having me jump through these extra hoops. And so I feel like I am thankful to Council President, Councilmember Christopherson, for wanting to look at what options are available to kind of bring this back to the neighbor level. But I'm concerned about the bar that asks community members to notify, either verbal or written, everyone within 100 feet of their property, and in addition to collect 2/3 of the signatures of those properties within 100 feet. We don't, in this community, we don't, if you get a barking dog, or if you decide you want to, run your leaf mower or leaf blower, or do construction or any other number of things on your property. We don't make you, go through those kind of hurdles. And I think that is a concern of mine. In addition, I think that one of the things that we should also be mindful of is that there may be language barriers that come up with asking people to go through these kind of hurdles to get chickens. And especially I think about our Hmong community and what that might take if there's, just notifications, but also going door to door. And on top of it, my concern about COVID and the fact that we're thinking about this at a time when we're not even encouraging anyone to go door to door about anything. And so given all of that, I'm kind of in the place where I'd actually like to, at some point here, make a motion, in fact, to postpone consideration of this for a couple months and work with stakeholders and community members to think about how we can do this differently, but do it in a way that does take the decision off of the council's plate and moves it to the community level. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Councilmember Worthman. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Gregor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, President Weld. Yeah, I guess just some of these may amount to questions, but, I think that one of the concerns I've heard from folks that have anticipated applying to have poultry, one of their concerns is just the education level of their neighbors, and obviously this is an opportunity to increase that, and I think it has, that as a positive aspect. At the same time, I think it may be helpful if I'm not sure if we have like a city brochure that explains in maybe less formal language than the ordinance does about this, about what it means to keep chickens and what it would mean for neighbors, and just so that those neighbors, when they're signing or not signing, they're making an informed decision. Obviously, they may, take their relationship with that particular neighborhood, the applicant, into consideration as well as to whether they would be in favor of them having chickens. But I guess, is there some sort of handy information that could actually be given to neighbors that's currently prepared by city staff at the moment? Because that would be one of my questions.
I don't know if there's any staff members that want to weigh in. I know that part of the application that when you apply for the poultry, there's a brochure with a lot of information and questions that are answered with that, with the idea of educating both the applicant and then, I guess, being able to answer questions to neighbors if necessary. But I know that that is something that is part of the amendment, is encouraging both having verbal and written materials that we can hand or leave with the neighbors, so that they can become better, informed and have a better understanding of what this is. And I think in the end, having a more positive and educated understanding of what it means. So, but I don't know if
I guess just a follow-up comment to that, if that's okay.
Sure.
I noticed that the ordinance language, it says that an applicant shall contact all property owners within 100 feet of the applicant's property with verbal or written information about their intent to apply for a I guess there's maybe a typo there. Apply for okay, yeah, that's correct. Apply for or renew a poultry license. So I guess since they're actually only required to submit 2/3 of neighbors in approval or in support, they don't technically have to contact all their neighbors. They could just contact the 2/3 that they think would most likely be in support. So it's maybe not as comprehensive in terms of awareness of the properties within 100 feet when you compare it to the current ordinance, which has the city provide written notification. Just one thing I wanted to mention if we're talking about reaching out to neighbors. Obviously, in person is more personal, but it just doesn't seem like this actually requires as thorough of contact of those 100 people within 100 feet. But just wanted to raise that too.
Yeah, if I understand the first sentence there, upon that first application and each subsequent renewal, the applicant shall contact all property owners within 100 feet of the applicant's property with verbal or written information about their intent to apply for a renewed poultry license. So they are required to reach out to everyone according to the ordinance. If I understand that correctly.
I don't know how we verify that, but, but thanks.
Sure. I don't know if Mr. Nick has any.
I don't have anything else to add other than I agree with the council president's interpretation of the requirement that there is shall there for contacting all property owners.
Thank you. Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Thank you, Council President Weldon. Thank you to yourself and to Councilmember Christopherson. As much as I am very supportive of the keeping of poultry in our city, it's obvious that we had some high-profile situations that came before council and really demonstrated to us that we have to look at this and we have to make the system work better so that we're not treating outlier cases as kind of juried by the city council. So I really, truly appreciate you all bringing this forward. One of the sticking points, I guess, that I have, or a little heartburn that I have, is it seems like there could be maybe a modified way to approach this, and I want to be sensitive that I'm not criticizing your work or your excellent work. I really value it, and it's so necessary. And thinking about it's creating more of a impediment for basically the good actors in the community who are going to do the right thing versus finding a way that we could, I don't know how to say it, but to focus our energy on the folks who are going to follow the rules and to make it less available of an option for people who just simply don't follow the rules, who just go rogue. I really find that to be problematic that people are going rogue and not following our safety process. So it sounds like Councilmember Worthman might have some ideas there, but I really think it's necessary. I think we have to talk about this, and I do worry, though, sincerely about creating barriers for people who are following the rules that we don't have for lots of other things in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Christopherson.
Thank you, President Weld. I'd like to respond generally to some of these concerns. When I ran for City Council, it was my thought that we really want to be a more closely connected community, especially in the neighborhoods. The calls that I receive are typically things about my neighbor is now keeping chickens and I didn't know that, or I don't like the fence that my neighbor put up, and it changes their relationships forever. So I think that always, as a community leader, to point that residents back to their ability to build relationships and make reasonable decisions with their neighbor so that they find a middle ground is really something that we can do as council members in teaching people to be engaged citizens. So I was really looking at this from that perspective. I'm not in any way convinced that this is a the last or the best motion or amendment to this ordinance. Part of the conversation that came up as Council President Weld and I were talking about it is there are other aspects that our residents see as being impediments. One would be the amount of money that covers the expenses of the City County Health Department in giving the license, and is it too high, and are there other ways in which we can assist residents who are experiencing low income in accessing some kind of quote-unquote scholarship resource, making it's not that it's our responsibility, but creating some type of resource out of the community that helps everyone access the ability to keep poultry. In the same way that you help them to be efficient, effective in solving these problems, in biting their neighbors into decisions that will impact all of them, invite the entire community in making things like this that build a strong community, a strong neighborhood, something that's accessible to everyone. So while I see these as being, I really do agree with the conversation that I'm hearing, but I think that I personally want to move in a direction where I respect the ability of the neighbors, my residents, the people that live across the street from me, to have good conversations, to build strong relationships, and to keep poultry without having to go rogue or without having to feel like you can't afford to get the license, so you're just going to put them in the backyard where nobody can see them. So I think this is a first, but I think that educational piece needs to be broader and more visible. I think that access to funds that help people who cannot necessarily afford the licensing fee can be assisted in getting that. But I think I really would lean into the first thing being letting it see that contacting my neighbors is really an asset to me, and it's time well spent, and it's something that's going to feed my enjoyment of my neighborhood as opposed to being a burden in getting a license. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Christopherson. Councilor Vice President Emmanuel, did you have?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down. Thank you.
No problem. I guess if I could just, I'm sorry, Councilmember Worthman.
I'll let you speak first.
I guess two things, and I mentioned this last night too, that really brought me to where we are today. And I think that it's already apparent to all of us that this is impossible to make it a perfect ordinance that makes it work and flow and be as easy as we'd like it to be. But I think as we go on in the future, that we can continue to improve upon it. And I think one of those ways is again bringing it back to the neighbors and letting them being the deciding members of this idea of poultry keeping. And I think that having the conversations between each other and getting to know each other and invite each other to be a part of it. I think if I had a poultry keeper next door to me and my kids were younger, I would love the opportunity to introduce those kids to my kids to this idea and understand it and be a part of it. And I think that can happen. And with that comes then, again, that bonding and that, that working together kind of relationship that we want to see in our neighborhoods. And I think eventually we'll see that grow into, fewer complaints and a better understanding and more people keeping poultry. And I think that ideally is the goal and what we're shooting for. I think that the idea of the community partnerships that we can set up possibly, brings an important part to this idea of, not just funding, but being able to offer the advice and ideas and suggestions to those that want to start keeping poultry on how to build their coop and what's the best way to put up the wire and keeping of their food and so on. I mean, I think all those things that can be answered by somebody that has experience with it, that can guide them and counsel them through it, again, makes it a stronger program, and I think something that will be welcomed throughout our community. I know that the having to come back to council, again, as I mentioned, removes all the decision-making from the neighborhood, and that was the hardest part for me. And again, I respect all the work that's gone into this, back in 2018, and I know it's a challenge, and I think that we can continue to fine-tune it, but I don't think it should be the decision of council members on whether or not a specific neighbor can or can't have poultry, and I think it should be the neighbors themselves. And I think if we start communicating with each other and talking with each other, we can make that happen. So, Councilmember Worthman, I appreciate you yielding the floor for my comments.
Thank you, Council President Weld. I think just a few things is, one is to point out that on our beekeeping ordinance, the way that it's structured is that notifications go out to neighbors, and it takes 40% of the neighbors to register their their concern that they don't want to see the license issued, and or that someone registers that they have a health issue, in which case I believe it's just administrative that decision is then made. But there's it's the onus is then on neighbors who have a strong objection to organize and decide that they don't want someone to keep bees, versus the other way around, which is on the person who wants to do it having to jump through all of these hoops. And so I just want to point out that there's different ways of thinking about this, but I think it comes back to kind of what priority and how difficult do we want to make it. The other thing is the idea of signatures is something that we've discussed as a council, I think 3 times in the last decade. And I think it's even been voted down as an idea in the past, because one of the things it does do is can potentially create a negative relationship between neighbors who don't want to sign, or who say, I'm not going to sign. And so then, sort of the reverse happens, which is, you don't get along with your neighbors, and they're more apt to maybe, make the call to the health department if something's not going right. So just to keep in mind that not that it's a bad idea, but just that there has been that concern about the idea of signature collection. I think, just lastly, I feel strongly that that people, especially who have been doing this the right way, I mean, this is an ordinance change that's happening because of a few bad actors in the community who decided to kind of go ahead and keep poultry without going through the steps. It's not necessarily in response, it's sort of in response to that negative, the negative actions that have happened that have made, landed on our plate. But to me, that's not necessarily how you would think about writing an ordinance that opens up more opportunities for people to keep chickens. If anything, you'd say, well, if you don't follow those rules, maybe you can't get a permit for a year or 2 years or something, and focus on people who didn't actually get the go through the process in the first place. So that's just another thing to kind of point out. But I feel strongly that this would be made a stronger change. I agree with the idea of it, but I think it would be a stronger change if it goes to some neighborhood groups, neighborhoods, organizations, and some stakeholders, especially people who helped craft this ordinance and who are currently keeping chickens, to get more input. And I'd be willing to do that outreach and try and strengthen this language. So in the spirit of that work, I would like to motion to postpone consideration of this item for 3 months.
This is Councilmember Beaton. I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to postpone, Councilmember Worthman, and seconded from Councilmember Beaton. Any other discussion from Councilmember Worthman or Beaton?
No, I kind of explained it.
Okay. Any other, Councilmember Christopherson?
Thank you, President Worthman. I'm not necessarily against this, but I would like to be included in the conversation, or at least make the meetings or conversations posted so that other people can be party to the conversation and period. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other discussion regarding postponement? I guess, you know, if this can be made stronger and we can answer more questions, and you know, then I understand the idea of postponement, and I believe that that's possible if we do that. You know, again, I worry if there are going to be other matters that will come before us during that time, other objections that would require our consideration, which, again, we can certainly get through that as well, but I guess that would be my one concern. So. Any other discussion in regards to the postponement? Council Vice President Emmanuel.
Thank you. I don't have any comments on the amendment, but I do have a procedural question on, and I don't know if this is germane, so it's okay if somebody needs to tell me to ask a different time, but, you know, essentially what happens if we have somebody who is not complying by the process, and then it does come back before council? I guess the question that I just wonder about is why is it even something we have to consider? Why isn't there a mechanism to say, no, you can't have it, and you have to go through the process before you can be considered for the application or the license? Just wonder, like, is that a possibility? And if not, and it's okay if I need to take this question offline, but that's something I really do, it has made me really wonder about. Why can't we just say no if you're not following the rules?
City Attorney Nick.
Did you want me to answer that question if I can? Or?
Certainly.
Or I can say.
Yep. No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, briefly. Yeah, I think you said okay, so stop me if it's not. But briefly to Vice President Emmanuel's question, we can, and it usually, frankly, is the way we would recommend an ordinance. But I think both, you know, beekeeping and poultry keeping, you know, many versions, much discussion, and some, you know, desire ultimately, in this instance, to keep council, you know, involved in a case-by-case basis. Otherwise, setting out legislative standards and then they're either met or not is certainly an acceptable way to go forward as well.
Thank you, Mr. Nick. Is there any other? Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you, Council President, and thanks to everyone for your careful thinking around this. I just wanted to voice my support for postponing it, especially as we're thinking about this question of, you know, what happens if somebody does kind of try to skip through the process and not do it. Could there be some kind of a automatic process with that? To me, that suggests that it's kind of a good idea to just sort of take our time and you know, regroup with people who've been working on this and try to see how we can get the best policy in place. So thank you, everybody, for thinking so carefully about this.
Thank you, Councilmember Anderson. And if I could, Councilmember Worthman, was there a time limit on this postponement?
I had requested to postpone 3 months, so the last meeting in November.
In November, okay.
But now I'm realizing is that our budget meeting?
That'd be one of the budget. Yeah. Either be the budget or the levy, right?
Well, hopefully, if the work is done on this, it shouldn't be a long item.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Just that if the work is done ahead of time, hopefully it won't be too lengthy of an item. So I'll keep that date of November, last meeting in November. And if something comes up, I guess we could always push it further.
Sure. Okay. Any other discussion in regards to the postponement? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Lohr,
Aye.
Weld,
Aye.
Worthman,
Aye.
Zhang,
Aye.
Anderson,
Aye.
Beaton,
Aye.
Berge,
Aye.
Christofferson,
Aye.
Emmanuel,
Aye.
Gregert,
Aye.
Klinkhammer.
No.
And the postponement passes 10-1. I believe that takes us to announcements. City Manager Peters.
I have no announcements for you tonight.
Maybe just a reminder about next meeting.
If you'd like. So Memorial Day week or Labor Day weekend, you do not have a meeting. You'll just have the business meeting on Tuesday at 4 o'clock.
Thank you. Anything else or any other announcements from council? Seeing none, if there is no objection from council, and I don't see any, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the City of Eau Claire.